Chapter 2976. The world of the ruins of world was still dark, and the aura of the ruins of world was still chaotic. Little brother, please wait. Just as Qinzong was about to step forward, an old voice came from behind him. What can I do for you? Qinzong turned around and looked at the person who spoke. It was the old man who was holding a black, dragon-headed walking stick. Beside the old man stood a middle-aged man with thick arms and a beautiful woman. My name is Wulongzi. They are giant arm venerable and fantasy dance king. The old man appeared to be very old, but his body still contained extremely terrifying power. He transmitted his voice. The three of us have been at the secondary saint level for over 1,000 years. This is especially so for this old man. I'm already nearing the upper limit of my lifespan. The last time I entered the ruins of world, I was lucky enough to find a ruins treasure. However, the ruins treasure was not fully mature at that time. I planned to take it away after the ruins treasure was fully mature. However, a divine demon appeared. In order to prevent the divine demon from finding out about the ruins treasure, I could only kill the divine demon. However, they were too strong, and I could only lure them away. Wulongzi spoke slowly, but it contained an indescribable power. People could not help but listen to him carefully. This time, after I recovered from my injuries, I invited my good friends Giant Arm, Venerable, and Fantasy Dance King to enter the ruins of world together. I plan to find the ruins treasure. If I can find it, I can sell it to Tai Xian and exchange it for a lot of false divinity. When Qinzong heard about the ruins treasure, he was shocked. What was a ruins treasure? It was a general term for the treasures in the ruins of world. The ruins of world was very dangerous, but at the same time, after a long period of time, some special things were born, such as plants or ores. They all contained incredible power and became different kinds of treasures. These treasures were very useful to saint-level experts. However, there were too few ruins treasures, and the possibility of finding one was very low. Wulongzi's luck was very good, as he was able to find a ruins treasure. However, his luck was not good, as he did not find mature ruins treasure. He even gave it up because of the arrival of the divine demon. However, giving up was only temporary. Now, Wulongzi had come again. He had even invited 2 quasi-saints to come along with him. Little friend, this old man would like to invite you to form a team and head to the location of the ruined treasure. At that time, if we obtain the ruined treasure and bring it back to the Supreme Profound Realm, little friend can obtain 10% of the Supreme Profound coins exchanged. Wulongzi said in a deep voice. Inviting others along was naturally for the sake of greater insurance. However, as the inviter, he had to give others benefits. Otherwise, why would others accept his invitation? Forming a team was all about mutual benefits. If you only thought about your own benefits and ignored others, who would be willing to form a team with you? How much is the ruined treasure worth? Qinzong asked. Ruined treasure was a general term. Different ruined treasures naturally had different values. If the value of the ruined treasure itself was not high, then 10% would not be much. Please forgive this old man for not being able to reveal what the ruined treasure is, but this old man can guarantee that the ruined treasure is worth at least 1,000 Taishian coins, or even more. Wulongzi's tone was fervent and his expression excited. This old man guarantees that as long as you can obtain the ruined treasure, little friend will be able to obtain at least 100 Tai Profound coins. 100 Tai Profound coins. More or less. Qinzong understood that 100 Tai Profound coins was not a small amount. He was immediately moved. Brother, the 4 of us will work together and look after each other. If we encounter those gods and devils, our chances of survival will be greater. We can also kill the gods and devils and obtain more Tai Profound coins. The giant armed venerable said. His voice was deep and vigorous, and it shook the air. The giant armed venerable's words were not without reason. Qinzong immediately muttered to himself, then agreed. All right, since little friend has agreed, then we will swear on the great Tao that we will absolutely not harm each other. Otherwise, the path of the great Tao will be cut off. Wulongzi immediately said. This was also a kind of guarantee. Of course, it was not an absolute guarantee. After all, the path of the quasi-sage was basically cut off. Unless there was enough pseudo-divinity or even divinity, there would be hope for them to attack the sacred rank again. If they were willing to pay this price, it was not impossible to violate the oath. However, all the quasi-sages who entered the world ruins were not resigned to it. They all wanted to attack the sacred rank. If they violated the oath, then even if they obtained more divinity, the chances of them attacking the sacred rank would be even smaller. Basically, no one was willing to violate the oath. However, the most important thing was self-confidence. Chunzong was confident in his own strength. As long as they did not have the strength of a true sacred rank, Chunzong was not afraid. It was not like he had not killed a third-rank demigod god before. Moreover, his current strength was more than twice as tyrannical as when he killed the third-rank demigod god. Although the three of them were not weak and were quasi-sages, they should be quasi-sages who had lived for a long time. However, their strength was still insufficient. With the three of them working together, Chunzong was confident that he could kill them. After swearing the oath, the four of them formed a team. Of course, this oath was actually useless against Chunzong. This was because Chunzong had walked his own path and did not comprehend the great Tao of heaven and earth. Therefore, he would not be restrained. However, under normal circumstances, Chunzong would not violate his own promise. Swearing an oath was equivalent to a promise. After the four of them formed a team, their relationship naturally became closer and they understood each other better. Among them, Wu Longzi was a rogue cultivator. He was a rogue cultivator who had lived for more than 9,800 years. He was only 100 years away from the maximum lifespan of a quasi-sage of 10,000 years. Was 100 years very long? Whether it was long or not was a relative term. To an ordinary person, 100 years was naturally very long. However, to a quasi-sage who had lived for more than 9,000 years, it was very short. With only 100 years left, Wu Longzi was naturally very anxious. He did not want to die. He wanted to live longer. However, the minimum lifespan of a quasi-sage was 5,000 years, and the maximum was 10,000 years. Wu Longzi had already used various methods to extend his lifespan, such as cultivating life-prolonging techniques, consuming life-prolonging elixirs, and so on to increase his lifespan to the maximum of 10,000 years. However, time was the most merciless. Now, there was only 100 years left. Wu Longzi did not have the slightest bit of luck and could only fight for his life. If he succeeded in fighting for his life and broke through to the quasi-sage level, he could extend his lifespan by tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years and live freely in the world. If he failed in fighting for his life, he would only die 100 years earlier. There was not much difference. The giant arm venerable was someone who came from a sacred ground in a large region, while the fantasy dance king was the leader of the strongest force in a small region. The giant armed venerable and the fantasy dance king were not as old as Wu Longzi, but they had both lived for more than 3,000 years. They were much older than Chunzong, who had lived for a few hundred years. Chunzong naturally did not hide his own information. He was a rogue cultivator a few hundred years old and had just joined Taishan not long ago. Of course, Chunzong did not mention any other information because it was not necessary. Some simple and basic mutual understanding was enough. As for more information, it would depend on whether they would become friends in the future and then get to know each other better. Next, Wu Longzi naturally led the way while the other three followed. Previously, Wu Longzi had left some imprints as a mark. When he entered the ruins of world again, he could follow the aura of the imprints he left behind to find his way. Otherwise, with the environment of the ruins of world, it would be impossible to distinguish the direction and find his way. I only hope that the ruins treasure was not taken away by other people or gods. Wu Longzi thought, if it was taken away, there was no doubt that his hope would be cut off and it would be a great blow to him. Because if he could obtain the ruins treasure and bring it back to Taishan, he could exchange it for thousands of Taishan coins. He could give 30% to the others and get 70%, which was enough to buy a lot of fake divinity. At that time, he would have another chance to break through to the quasi-sage level. His luck was not bad. Along the way, He did not encounter any gods or devils and did not encounter any danger. While walking, Wulongzi walked and stopped. Every time he stopped, he would pinch his fingers as if he was calculating something or sensing something. Immediately, he revealed a joyful expression and sped up while saying, "The three of you, hurry up. The ruined treasure is just ahead." Chunzong and the other two immediately sped up to catch up. Not long after, Wulongzi stopped again. His eyes flickered with excitement as he stared ahead. There was a pitch-black area in front of him that was slightly fluctuating. It was like a lake of nothingness that was floating in mid-air. However, what really attracted everyone's attention was a lotus flower in the middle of the lake. It was a lotus flower that had already bloomed. It had a total of 18 petals. The innermost layer had 3 petals, the middle layer had 6 petals, and the outermost layer had 9 petals. This 18-petaled lotus was completely black, as if it was made of black gemstones or black divine crystals. Just by looking at it, there was a mysterious feeling that was incomparably attractive. From the 18-petaled lotus flower that seemed to be made of divine crystals, traces of mysterious fluctuation spread out. This fluctuation was like a god or a devil, and it was very shocking. That's it. Wulongzi was extremely excited. His old body was trembling. It didn't bloom last time, and now it has finally bloomed. Is this the great jade black divine lotus? After staring for a while, Giant Arm Venerable said with a slightly trembling voice, "Great jade black divine lotus?" Fantasy Dance King seemed to know about this ruined treasure. Her voice was also trembling, and she looked extremely excited. Chunzong didn't know, so he only revealed a hint of doubt. In Taishan, there were senior experts who sorted out the ruined treasures that appeared in the ruins of the world and turned them into a treasure book called Taishan Ruins. There are relatively detailed records in it. Giant Arm Venerable immediately explained. There are a total of 30 ruined treasures recorded in the Taishan Ruins treasure book. Among these 30 ruined treasures, the lowest can be exchanged for 100 Taishan coins, and the highest can be exchanged for tens of thousands of Taishan coins. Chunzong was shocked. 110,000. The difference was 100 times. Then, what about the great jade black divine lotus? Looking at the reactions of Giant Arm Venerable and Fantasy Dance King, the value of the great jade black divine lotus was not low. It was probably more than 1,000 Taishan coins, or else they wouldn't be so excited. The value of the great jade black divine lotus in the Taishan Ruins treasure book can be ranked in the top 5. Its value is at least 3,000 Taishan coins. Giant Arm Venerable's voice was trembling. It was a tremor caused by extreme excitement. Chapter 2977. The Great Jade Black Divine Lotus. A ruined treasure worth 3,000 Taishan coins, no matter who it was, would be extremely excited. Even a true saint rank expert would be extremely excited. One had to know that killing a divine fiend god equivalent to the pristine saint stage and obtaining its divinity could only be exchanged for 1,000 Taishan coins. 3,000 Taishan coins was equivalent to the divinity of 3 basic divine fiend gods. 10% was equivalent to 300 Taishan coins. If it was exchanged for a rank 3 demigod divine demon's pseudo-divinity, it would be equivalent to 7, almost 8. If it was exchanged for a rank 2 demigod divine demon's pseudo-divinity, it would be as many as 15. If it was exchanged for a rank 1 demigod divine demon's pseudo-divinity, it would be even more, a full 30. Was it easy to kill 30 rank 1 demigod divine demons? For the vast majority of quasi-saints, it was not easy. On the contrary, it was very difficult. If they were not careful, they would be killed. Divine demons were not livestock that could be slaughtered. They were terrifying existences with tyrannical strength. Therefore, if they obtained the great jade black divine lotus and brought it back to the profound realm, after exchanging it for 3,000 Taishan coins, they would be able to obtain 300 Taishan coins. Compared to killing divine demons, the harvest was undoubtedly many times greater. Urgent. Everyone's breathing became hurried. Even Chunzong found it difficult to calm down. 300 Tai Xian coins. This would require him to spend a lot of time searching for demigod divine demons to kill. The three of you, please protect this old man and let this old man obtain the great jade black divine lotus. Wu Longzi tried his best to adjust his breathing. After calming himself down, he said in a serious tone, he had already prepared everything. A black chain appeared in his hand. The chain did not look like it was made of metal. Instead, it looked like it was made of some kind of black jade. Chunzong, giant arm venerable, and fantasy dance king immediately spread out and maintained a certain distance from Wu Longzi. They paid attention to their surroundings to prevent any divine demons from appearing. Wu Longzi was fully focused on waving the black jade chain in his hand. Under the infusion of power, the black jade chain suddenly shot out. It was as fast as a black snake coming out of its hole. It shot towards the great jade black divine lotus like lightning and immediately wrapped around it. However, the moment it was entangled, the big jade black divine lotus suddenly trembled and released layers of black light. It wanted to repel the black jade chains, but it was unable to do so. It seemed to be because of the material. Wu Longzi immediately exerted his strength. The black jade chains instantly tightened and pulled the great jade black god lotus over. However, the great jade black god lotus continued to resist. It was instinctively unwilling to be pulled over, resulting in a tug-of-war. However, in this tug-of-war, it was obvious that the great jade black divine lotus was at a disadvantage. Wu Longzi was slowly closing the gap between them. Giant Arm, Venerable, and Fantasy Dance Emperor smiled. If this continued, they would be able to obtain the great jade black divine lotus in less than 60 breaths of time. Then, they would immediately leave the ruins of world and return to Taixien. 10 breaths passed. 20 breaths passed. A sudden change occurred. Numerous tyrannical auras were rapidly approaching from afar. That aura was different from the aura of a cultivator. It was overbearing and lofty. It was the aura of a fiend god. A fiend god is coming. Shenzong's senses were the sharpest. He immediately said, and his voice directly entered everyone's ears. Wu Longzi's arm trembled slightly. He exerted his strength again and pulled hard. However, he did not dare to use too much strength. If he used too much strength, he was afraid that the black jade chains would break. Once the black jade chains broke, it would be even more difficult to obtain the great jade black divine lotus. Steady. He had to steady. As for the fiend gods that were coming, he could only hope that they were not very strong. Giant Arm Venerable and the other two would be able to resist them. They did not need to resist for too long. They only needed 10 to 20 breaths of time. Once they obtained the great jade black divine lotus, they would immediately leave and not be entangled with the fiend gods. However, if the fiend gods were to come, then it would be troublesome. After Chun Zong finished speaking, Giant Arm, Venerable, and Fantasy Dance Emperor were slightly stunned. Just as they were about to say something, they also felt a different aura. It was the aura of a fiend god. Sure enough, a fiend god was coming. At the same time, they were extremely shocked. This Chinzong had only lived for a few hundred years. In terms of age, he was only a fraction of their age. However, his senses were actually so sharp. Although they were not sure how strong Chinzong was, he was definitely a quasi-saint. With his sharp senses, his chances of survival in a place like the ruins of world would be higher. A fiend god had appeared and was approaching. It's a demigod fiend god. Chinzong was the first to speak. There are a total of 5 of them. Giant Arm, Venerable, and Fantasy Dance Emperor let out a sigh of relief when they heard that there were demigod fiend gods. They were most worried about fiend gods. That was a level that they could not contend against. Even if 10 quasi-saints worked together, they would not be a match for a fiend god. It was a kind of difference in nature. However, when they heard that there were 5 demigod fiend gods, their expressions changed drastically. Even the weakest rank 1 demigod fiend god had terrifying strength. Most of the quasi-saints only had the strength of a rank 1 demigod fiend god. Excluding Chunzong, whose strength they did not know, the strongest among the 3 of them was Wu Longzi. He had the strength of a rank 2 demigod fiend god. Giant-armed Venerable and Fantasy Dance Emperor were both rank 1 demigod fiend gods. The reason why Wu Longzi had the strength of a rank 2 demigod fiend god was because he had lived for a long time. He continuously refined himself and absorbed some false divinity. Finally, his strength increased not long ago. As for Chunzong, his strength could be considered as a rank 1 demigod fiend god. If the 5 demigod fiend gods were all rank 1 demigod fiend gods, then the 4 of them would be able to contend against them. As for the outcome, it was hard to say. However, at this moment, Wu Longzi obviously could not make a move. Furthermore, what if the demigod fiend gods were not just rank 1 demigod fiend gods? Giant-armed Venerable and Fantasy Dance Emperor's minds flashed with many thoughts in an instant. 3 rank 1 demigods, 2 rank 2 demigods. Chunzong's voice sounded again, but this time, Giant-armed Venerable and Fantasy Dance Emperor fell into darkness. A wave of despair swept over them. Wu Longzi run. Giant-armed Venerable immediately roared. 2 rank 2 demigod fiend gods and 3 rank 1 demigod fiend gods were attacking. Even if Wu Longzi could make a move, they were still not their match. The only thing they could do now was to give up on the great jade black divine lotus and use it to attract the 5 demigod fiend gods. This would give them a chance to escape. As for the great jade black divine lotus, it was fine if they could not obtain it. First, they had to save their own lives to have a chance to talk about the future. Wu Longzi, however, was hesitating. He only had 100 years of life left. If he missed this opportunity, when would he be able to obtain enough Tai Xian coins? One was his life, the other was his future. What should he choose? Although there was only hope if he kept his life, it was already difficult for him to see any hope. This might be his last hope. Madness. Wu Longzi wanted to go crazy, but he restrained himself. Although 100 years was short, it did not mean that there would not be a second chance. Furthermore, he wanted to go crazy, but he could not drag others down with him. Reason and madness clashed continuously. The speed of pulling the great jade black divine lotus decreased. The great jade black divine lotus seemed to have realized that there was an opportunity. It burst forth with a tyrannical force, trying to break free from the black jade chains. Wu Longzi, focus on obtaining the divine lotus. There is no need to worry about a few demigod fiend gods. Chunzong's voice directly entered Wu Longzi's ears. That voice contained an unparalleled sharpness and might, as if heavenly swords were clashing in the sky. It also contained an indescribable stability, causing Wu Longzi to unconsciously feel less apprehensive and more resolute. Resolute. Even more resolute. Since that was the case, then let's go crazy. If we don't live, then we will die. The moment Chunzong finished speaking, he took a step forward. His body was like a stream of light as he rushed forward, directly facing the 5 demigod fiend gods who were approaching. They were all fiend gods from the beast god bloodline. A terrifying and extremely violent aura was emitted from the 5 demigod fiend gods. Because they had also discovered Chunzong and the others, and also saw Chunzong who was charging towards them, they all revealed a sinister smile. Killing intent surged out like waves, rushing in all directions. Kill! They directly charged towards them. Needless to say, they were mortal enemies. There was only one outcome if they fought to the death. The faces of the giant-armed Venerable One and the Phantom Dance King changed drastically, but they gritted their teeth and mobilized their powers to burst out in an instant to counter the attack. No matter what, they were still a team. At least for now, they couldn't just watch their teammates fight with the fiend gods while they did nothing. At the same time, Chunzong's right hand clenched in the air, and a sword light instantly shot out. It was incomparably dazzling and resplendent. The moment it appeared, it was as if the sun had risen in the sky, emitting an unparalleled sword aura. This sword aura directly swept across the sky, covering the sky and covering the earth, and enveloping the 5 demigod fiend gods who were rushing towards them. Under the impact of the terrifying sword aura, 3 of the 5 demigod fiend gods suddenly trembled. Their speed slowed down, and a trace of fear appeared on their faces. As for the other two demigod fiend gods, they felt their bodies sink slightly, and their expressions turn serious. Very strong. The strength of this human in front of them was very strong. He actually made them feel threatened. However, fiend gods had always been fierce. Unless it was a crushing situation, unless they truly witnessed the strength of others, they would not retreat. Naturally, it was better for Chunzong if they did not retreat. Kill. The mystery of the divine sun blade technique flashed across Chunzong's mind. During this period of time, Chunzong had been comprehending the divine sun blade technique. Even when he was in the ruins of the world, he was still comprehending it. Just now, when he was protecting Wu Longzi, he was still comprehending it without stopping. The Xinyang saber technique was a saber technique, but Chunzong cultivated the way of the sword. The two were different, but martial arts always led to the same destination. There were always some mysteries in common. Chunzong comprehended the mysteries of the Xinyang saber technique and absorbed part of it into his own swordsmanship. The single heart sword technique was broad and profound. All the mysteries were in the heart. But where did these mysteries come from? Naturally, one would have to comprehend them by oneself. Comprehend the mysteries of heaven and earth and everything in the world, and then integrate them into one's swordsmanship. Only then would one be able to continuously improve and gather all the mysteries in one's swordsmanship. Only then would one be able to use all the mysteries in one's swordsmanship at will. That was the most powerful swordsmanship. Chapter 2978. The 5 demigod gods and demons stood one after the other, unleashing all of their power. Terrifying beastly roars suddenly sounded, and blood-red qi flowed in all directions. Every god and demon's body swelled up, becoming stronger and taller. The aura they emitted also became more terrifying, causing Colossal Arm Knight and Fantasy Dance King's faces to change. However, Chunzong's expression did not change at all. Only his eyes became brighter. Swinging the sword, the first sword of the single heart sword technique was unleashed. This sword was filled with an indescribable charm. It was also filled with a shocking sword intent. The sword intent seemed to be able to pierce through the 9 heavens. This sword contained the mysteries of the rising sun. Under this sword, the 5 demigod-level divine demons exploded one after another. Their aura became even more powerful, as if it could crush everything. Immediately, Chunzong swung the second sword. This sword carried part of the power of the first sword and became even more powerful. Then, Chunzong swung the third sword. This third sword carried the power of the second sword and became even more powerful. 1 sword, 2 swords, 3 swords. After 3 swords, the heavenly will sword in Chunzong's hand turned into a sword light once again and disappeared into his arm. The giant arm Venerable One and the Phantom Dance King had just charged over and were about to unleash their full power. The 5 demigod-level divine demons' bodies paused for a moment. In the next moment, their bodies were broken into pieces as if they were cut by an invisible sharp blade. The shocking sword chi directly penetrated their bodies and destroyed them. 3 swords killed 5 divine demons. Wu Longzi, who was slightly distracted, was stunned. His face was full of shock, while the giant arm Venerable One and the Fantasy Dance King were dumbfounded. They were indescribably shocked, and their hearts were in turmoil. They were extremely appalled. How could it be? How could it be so fast? Illusion? Was it all an illusion? Otherwise, how could Chunzong be so powerful? 3 swords killed 5 demigod-level divine demons. 3 of them were at the first level, and 2 were at the second level. They had only unleashed their full power and did not attack. It was not because they were unwilling to attack, but because they did not even have the time to attack. Too fast. 3 swords seemed like 1 sword. The power of the 3 sword strikes was unstoppable. This level of strength had already surpassed the level of a rank 2 demigod god fiend. That was the level of a rank 3 demigod god fiend, right? Giant Arm Venerable One and Fantasy Dance King did not know either. Their minds were in a mess from the shock. Too strong. It was true that Chunzongyo had the strength of a quasi-sage. However, Their initial assumption was that he should be an ordinary quasi-sage. Who would have thought that he would display the strength of a peak quasi-sage? This was simply terrifying. A peak quasi-sage whose strength was equivalent to a demigod rank godfiend in just a few hundred years. How exactly did he cultivate? For a moment, they felt like they had wasted all their training. It would have been better if they hadn't compared themselves, but once they did, they felt so ashamed that they wanted to dig a hole and bury themselves. Qinzong wasn't surprised or excited by the 3 sword strikes. This was within reason. If it weren't for the fact that he was trying to integrate the profundity of the divine Yang saber technique into the single-hearted sword technique, Qinzong wouldn't have used 3 sword strikes. The first sword strike was enough to kill all 5 gods and demons. Qinzong was secretly satisfied with this result. This was just a preliminary attempt to integrate the profoundness of the divine Yang saber technique into the single-hearted sword technique. Indeed, there was an improvement and the effect was quite good. With a slight movement, Qinzong immediately appeared among the 5 people. Next to the corpses of the demigod gods were the pseudo-divinities that Qinzong had absorbed. There were 3 first-order demigod gods and 2 second-order demigod gods. As for their storage artifacts, they had become Qinzong spoils. However, a demigod divine demon storage artifact usually didn't have anything good, so it was better than nothing. For example, Qinzong's luck was pretty good to be able to obtain the incomplete divine Yang saber technique. According to the team's distribution rules, anything obtained from killing a god or demon alone would belong to the killer. If they were working together, then it would be distributed according to their contribution. Therefore, these 5 pseudo-divinities all belonged to Qinzong. Qinzong didn't hold back at all. He also needed Tai Xian coins. Although the giant arm Venerable and the fantasy dance emperor were envious, they weren't dissatisfied. Moreover, after witnessing Qinzong's super strength, they had an indescribable excitement in their hearts. To be able to work together with an expert like Qinzong was also a kind of luck. In the next few dozen breaths, no more gods or demons came. Wu Longzi successfully obtained the Great Jade Black Divine Lotus. When the Great Jade Black Divine Lotus entered his hand, Wu Longzi's entire body was trembling because of excitement. There was no reason for him not to be excited. It represented the hope of him breaking through to the Saint Realm once again. Little friend, this time, it's all thanks to you. Although Wu Longzi was excited, he didn't get carried away. He didn't forget Qinzong's contribution. This time, if Qinzong wasn't here, they wouldn't be able to obtain anything. They might even be killed. Let's go back first. Qinzong said neither slowly nor quickly. With the Great Jade Black Divine Lotus in their hands, of course, it was best to go back and exchange it for Tai Xian coins to prevent any accidents from happening. Yes, let's go back quickly. The giant arm Venerable also said excitedly. The 4 of them immediately activated the power of the Tai Xian token. With the guidance, they headed back. Along the way, Wu Longzi was very silent, as if he was thinking. The giant arm Venerable and the fantasy dance emperor were also very excited. They didn't say much and kept speeding up their journey. For humans, it's your honor to meet this god. A voice with a hint of surprise sounded. It was the language of the gods and demons. However, Qinzong and the other 3 had learned the language of the gods and demons, so they understood it. At the same time, a figure filled with a terrifying aura rapidly approached. Its appearance was as ferocious as a demon's, and its pair of scarlet eyes emitted a terrifying will. It made Wu Longzi, the giant arm Venerable, and the fantasy dance emperor tremble uncontrollably. God and demon. This was a demigod god and a rank 3 demigod god. The 3 of them together had no power to resist at all. They would be killed in a few moves. In an instant, the 3 of them looked at Qinzong. They only hoped that Qinzong could resist the other party. Surrender. As my slaves, you can live. The demon god spoke again. Capturing humans as slaves and bringing them to the demigod realm was one of the methods of the gods and demons. Seems like I'm in luck. Qinzong smiled. He spoke in a language of gods and demons, and the other party could understand him. However, when the other party was puzzled, he noticed that the other party's eyes were very bright, staring at him as if he was staring at some kind of prey. Arrogant. The demon god immediately understood that this human was treating him as a prey. He deserved to die for being so arrogant and bold. Without any hesitation, the rank 3 demigod god immediately attacked. He pushed his palm forward. The pitch-black palm energy was extremely powerful and domineering. It carried with it a monstrous demigod aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas. As soon as it appeared, the void seemed to tremble. Wu Longzi and the other two were affected and trembled, especially the giant arm Venerable and the Fantasy Dance Emperor. The Fantasy Dance Emperor and the other two were the weakest. They were trembling and could not exert their strength. The difference was too great. Only Qinzong's expression did not change. As the sword light flickered, the heavenly will sword appeared once again. He immediately swung it. Sword 1 of the single-hearted sword technique. After sword 1 was sword 2, and after sword 2 was sword 3. Compared to the previous sword moves, they were more exquisite and powerful. Each of the 3 sword moves was more powerful than the previous one. The power of each sword move was constantly increasing. This was the swordsmanship that was infused with the divine Yang saber technique. It was even more perfect than the first time. Moreover, these 3 sword moves were executed with Qinzong's full strength. The power was even more shocking and terrifying. When the first sword collided with the demon god's palm, it instantly shattered. The second sword moved forward and shattered the palm. Soon after, the third sword moved towards the demon god. The demon god's expression changed drastically. He unleashed his full strength. Demonic chi billowed around his body and turned into pitch-black demonic flames that burned endlessly. He pushed out another palm. This time, the palm burned with extremely terrifying pitch-black demonic flames. Its power was even more shocking and had doubled. Qinzong's expression turned solemn. A rank 3 demigod god was much stronger than a rank 2 demigod god. The difference between a rank 2 demigod god and a rank 1 demigod god was much greater. Moreover, the techniques that a rank 3 demigod god possessed were much more powerful and mysterious. At the very least, Qinzong had never seen a rank 1 or rank 2 demigod god using the divine Yang saber technique or the demon god's palm technique. After releasing the 3 sword moves, Qinzong was already accumulating his strength. He continuously accumulated his strength and executed a technique that used strength to attack the weak. After accumulating his strength to the limit, he swung out his sword. This sword move was even more powerful. The sword light pierced through the sky and instantly collided with the demon god's palm that was burning with pitch-black demonic flames. It paused for a moment before exploding. Both of them were destroyed. The aftermath of the explosion was extremely terrifying. It crazily spread in all directions. Wu Longzi and the other two had already retreated. Otherwise, they would have been injured if they were affected. Qinzong didn't retreat. Instead, he pushed his strength to the limit. He silently closed in on the demon god like a phantom and swung his sword again. Sword 1, Sword 2, Sword 3. Qinzong's wrist moved and instantly struck out 3 times. Each strike was stronger and faster than the previous one. It could be said that the first 2 strikes were in service of the third strike. They became the foundation of the third strike's power. Although the demon god's reaction was extremely fast, it was still a tad too slow. It was immediately struck by Sword 3. Its tyrannical body couldn't withstand the sharpness of the sword and was instantly penetrated. A terrifying sword aura entered its body and sword intent spread out. Qinzong's figure was incomparably fast. He circled around the demon god like a phantom and swung his sword continuously. Kill. The rank 3 demigod god was finally killed by Qinzong. Previously, Qinzong had to use Little Taihao to kill the rank 3 demigod god. But now, he didn't need to use Little Taihao to kill the rank 3 demigod god. This was enough to show the increase in his strength. Another rank 3 pseudo-divinity and the rank 3 demigod god storage artifact were in his hands. After Qinzong killed the rank 3 demigod god, Wulongzi and the other two looked at Qinzong with shock. Previously, they had guessed that Qinzong had the strength of a rank 3 demigod god. But now, it seemed that he was even stronger and more terrifying than a rank 3 demigod god. Let's go. Qinzong spoke again. The three immediately reacted and hurriedly took action. As for Wulongzi, he handed the obsidian divine lotus to Qinzong for safekeeping. After all, Qinzong was the strongest among them. Chapter 2979. The return journey was smooth, and they did not encounter any more gods or demons, which made Wulongzi and the others relieved. It was no wonder that a rank 3 demigod god demon was too strong, which shocked them and made them unable to resist. After returning to the Tai Profound Realm, he took out the great jade black divine lotus and exchanged it for 3,000 Tai Profound coins. Giant Arm Venerable and Fantasy Dance King each got 300, while Qinzong got 600. Little friend Qinzong, you played a decisive role in getting the great jade black divine lotus and coming back alive. Wulongzi said seriously, without you, we wouldn't be able to get anything and might even die in the hands of the gods and demons. If not for my lifespan nearing its end and urgently needing Tai Profound coins, I would have given you more Tai Profound coins. I hope you don't think these 600 Tai Profound coins are too little. Thank you. Qinzong did not hold back and directly accepted the 600 Taishin coins. The giant-armed Venerable and the Fantasy Dance King were envious, but not jealous, because they knew that Qinzong deserved it, and what Wulongzi said was correct. In fact, even if Qinzong asked for half of the Tai Profound coins, it was not impossible. However, they agreed on 10%, so getting 20% was not bad. 600 Tai Profound coins, plus the value of the pseudo-divinities he obtained, it was a total of 710 Tai Profound coins, which was even closer to 1,000 Tai Profound coins. However, Qinzong did not exchange the pseudo-divinities for Tai Profound coins for the time being. It would not be too late to exchange them when he had enough. Very good. He only needed to enter the ruins of world one more time, and he might be able to gather 1,000 Tai Profound coins. Hope was right in front of him. The ruins of world is dangerous. Although little friend is not weak, you still have to be careful. Wulongzi said seriously. Wulongzi, I wish you success. Qinzong said concisely. Thank you for your auspicious words, haha, said Wulongzi in high spirits. His gray hair was fluttering in the wind. This should be his last attempt to break through to the saint level. If he succeeded, he would become a saint and his path would be different. If he failed, his path would be cut off. If I, Wulongzi, succeed in breaking through to the saint level, I will owe you one. If he failed, the so-called favor wouldn't matter. But if he succeeded, this favor would be valuable. A favor from a saint. Wulongzi said this because of the Taishin coins obtained from the distribution of the Great Jade Black Divine Lotus. Qinzong did not take the initiative to ask for more, which was equivalent to Wulongzi receiving Qinzong's kindness. Qinzong, I'm weak, so I can't say much. If you need my help, just let me know. I won't refuse you, Giant Arm Venerable One responded in a deep voice. Little brother Qinzong, I'm not as capable as you, but there are many beauties in the valley. Welcome to my little orchid valley. I guarantee that you'll enjoy yourself. Fantasy Dance Emperor chuckled. Her mature charm was very alluring. She knew how to get close to people. Thank you. Qinzong smiled and saluted with his sword. He turned and left for the ruins of world again. After seeing Qinzong off and looking at his back view, Wulongzi and the other two couldn't help but sigh with emotion. It was true that there would be new talents in every generation. They had lived for a few thousand years and were all quasi-saints, but they couldn't compare to a junior who had lived for a few hundred years. Stepping into the ruins of world again, the 9 experts guarding the stronghold were numb. This time, Qinzong had made up his mind. He must kill enough divine demons. Of course, he had to kill demigod divine demons. As for righteous gods, he wasn't their opponent now. His strong perception was even more prominent in this place. It became Qinzong's trump card. Not only were there demigod divine demons in the ruins of world, there were also righteous god divine demons. Of course, there were fewer righteous god divine demons. Time passed slowly. There was no sun, moon, or stars. There was no day or night. It was hard to feel the passage of time. At a glance, it was always the same. It was so dark and broken. After a long time, it was hard to avoid feeling depressed. It was a kind of depression that came from the bottom of one's heart. However, Chunzong wasn't affected at all. The ninth day, Chunzong calculated clearly. He seemed to be able to feel the flow of time even more clearly. Unfortunately, after 9 days, he only killed 2 rank 1 demigod divine demons. His harvest was very little. His eyes were extremely sharp. His perception was also raised to the extreme. In this place, his divine sense was restricted to the extreme. The range it could cover was even smaller than his vision. Suddenly, Chunzong vaguely felt a trace of tyrannical aura coming from afar. It was a little chaotic. No, under Chunzong's careful observation, the chaotic aura wasn't just one, but two. 2 completely different auras collided and formed chaos. Could it be that someone was fighting fiercely? Chunzong's eyes flashed slightly. Immediately, he rushed towards the direction of the chaotic aura. Although his speed was fast, his aura was still restrained. It wasn't leaked at all, making it harder for others to detect. The closer he got, the clearer the chaotic aura became. Sure enough, it was 2 different auras colliding fiercely. Every time they collided, a terrifying sound would be heard. The strength of these 2 auras also made Chunzong extremely shocked. Saint level. This was the aura of the saint level. In other words, the 2 sides fighting fiercely. One was a human saint level expert, and the other was a righteous god divine demon expert. Not long after, Chunzong finally saw 2 figures. They were constantly attacking. One of them was indeed a human cultivator from the ancient profound world. A pair of iron palms condensed an extremely terrifying power and struck out repeatedly. It was as if the void was shattered. Every palm contained an extremely terrifying power that could shatter mountains. The fiend god who was fighting with the saint-level expert was a fiend god from the divine bloodline. He held a great spear in his hand, and every thrust of his spear contained a terrifying power that could topple mountains and overturn seas. His momentum was incomparably vigorous, like a raging sea. Vaguely, one could hear the sound of surging waves repelling the surroundings. Chunzong didn't dare to get any closer. This was a suitable distance. Observe the battle. He carefully observed the battle between the 2 saint-level experts and the righteous god, divine demon expert. He analyzed their martial arts attainments, dissected their mysteries, and then integrated them into his swordsmanship. Of course, with Chunzong's current realm, it was not easy to analyze the mysteries of the saint-level martial arts. On the contrary, it was very difficult. However, as long as he could get a little of it, it would be of great help. The battle continued fiercely. Chunzong could see that the human saint-level expert was at a disadvantage. The martial arts of a divine demon had always been terrifying. They were extremely overbearing and powerful. Moreover, they were close to the mysteries of all things in the world. This was something that the human race couldn't compare with. However, Chunzong couldn't make a move because he was indeed not a match for the righteous god divine demon. He was too strong. If he made a move rashly, he might be killed instead. In the fierce battle, the saint-level expert couldn't dodge in time and was struck. The spear carried the violent power of the sea and immediately pierced through the saint-level expert's body. It penetrated his chest and went all the way to his back. Severe pain, that kind of pain, was indescribable. It directly made the saint-level expert roar. He turned it into a fierce strike. He suddenly grasped the handle of the spear with one hand and opened his other hand. In an instant, his palm doubled in size and emitted a layer of bronze luster. It looked like a millstone made of bronze. It carried a terrifying saint aura and fiercely blasted towards the divine demon. The long spear was held tightly and couldn't be pulled back. The divine demon immediately wanted to let go of the spear, but he was too late. With a bang, the palm landed on the god fiend's chest. A terrifying force instantly erupted and sent the god fiend flying. The god fiend coughed out a mouthful of blood. Go to hell. The fiend god was also ruthless. His retreating body suddenly came to a halt. His feet exploded with power, causing the ground to crack. His terrifying strength propelled him forward at an astonishing speed. He raised his right arm and swung it forward like a spear. His aura was extremely domineering and vigorous, carrying a terrifying killing intent. He would not stop until he had killed this Saint Realm expert. Bastard, if you want to die, let's die together. The Saint level expert was also very decisive. He directly pulled out the long spear from his body and let the blood spurt out. Then he raised his right arm, and the muscles on his right arm suddenly bulged. Like a strong bow being pulled to the limit, he suddenly threw the long spear at the divine demon. The long spear pierced through the air like a bolt of lightning. It was extremely fast and pierced through everything. At the same time, the Saint-class expert contracted his muscles so that his wounds would stop bleeding. He took a step forward and charged forward at an extremely fast speed. His palms instantly swelled into bronze millstones that emanated astonishing power as they smashed through the air. As the long spear was shot out, the divine demon skillfully grabbed it and turned it around. It flew towards the Saint-level expert. The iron palm slammed through the air and smashed the long spear away. The divine demon's terrifying attack also arrived. It pierced through the divine demon again, but the iron palm slammed into the divine demon's body again. It was 2 consecutive palms. The power of each palm was extremely terrifying and could crush everything. In an instant, the divine demon was sent flying hundreds of meters away again. When he landed, the divine demon didn't stop and quickly retreated. Although the Saint-level expert's strength wasn't as strong as the divine demon, his methods were more ruthless. It was as if he was fighting with his life on the line. As a result, the divine demon was continuously injured. Since he wasn't willing to fight with his life on the line, he naturally ran away because his injuries were too serious. The Saint-level expert wanted to chase after him, but he couldn't do it. His injuries were too serious. Even if he chased after him, he might be killed in the end. He immediately took out an elixir and consumed it to quickly recover his injuries and exhausted strength. Chunzong stared at the direction where the divine demon had left. A bold idea kept circling in his mind. Follow him, and take a look. Maybe the divine demon's injuries are very serious. Maybe I can kill him. If I succeed, the harvest will be amazing. What do you think? Should I take the risk and try? The power of his great clear sword was extraordinary, especially after it had been perfected during this period of time. It was now several times more powerful than when it was first created. Even a pristine saint would not dare to underestimate the power of this sword. If I can seize the opportunity, I might really be able to kill a divine demon. There's no time to lose. I'll follow him immediately. As for whether I should take action, I'll observe the situation first. Chapter 2980. With a poochie sound, the divine demon master spat out another mouthful of blood as he felt a terrifying force erupting within his body. This force was extremely powerful and overbearing, carrying with it an indescribable hardness as it rampaged through his body, as if it wanted to shatter everything inside his body. I can't continue like this. I have to heal myself. Even though the bodies of righteous gods and fiend gods were extremely tough, even tougher than regular human body practitioners, they were still unable to withstand the constant rampaging of this power. Wave after wave, it constantly battered their bodies like a raging tide. He had to stop and heal himself first. Otherwise, if this continued, his injuries would only become more and more serious. He also knew that this human's injuries were definitely not lighter than his own, perhaps even more serious. However, this human was extremely ruthless to others and ruthless to himself. He was completely gambling with his life. Although there was a gap in strength, it was not an absolute gap, just a slight one. If he fought with his life on the line, he might even die. However, he had his own advantages. His injuries would definitely heal faster, so if he chased after this human, he might be able to kill him. Killing a human saint stage powerhouse would also give him a lot of benefits. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he could not help but spit out another mouthful of blood, which was filled with a shocking aura. Spitting out blood constantly meant that this divine demon's injuries were very serious. He took out a black pill from his storage artifact and stuffed it into his mouth. This black pill was a pill from the demon god world, but it was different from the pills from the ancient profound world. In the ancient profound world, it could not be consumed at all. Once consumed, it would be like swallowing poison. Not only would there be no benefits, but there would also be a lot of disadvantages and fatal dangers. Similarly, the pills of the human race were useless to divine demons. After all, the physique of the human race from the ancient profound world was very different from that of the demon god world. Of course, if one obtained a divine medicine from the ancient profound world or a divine medicine from the celestial devil world, then it would be the raw material. One could extract the essence through some means and then refine it into a suitable medicinal pill. The moment this divine demon swallowed the pill, a cold light suddenly flashed behind him, as fast as a meteor chasing after the moon, incomparably fast and subtle, instantly stabbing towards the divine demon's back. But even if a righteous god was heavily injured, his senses were still astonishingly sharp. The moment the cold star shot through the air, the god immediately moved to the side. His reaction was so fast that it was astonishing. In an instant, a second sword light flashed, its speed 10% faster than the first, and the power contained in it was also 10% stronger. The combination of power and speed caused the overall power to increase by 30%, even more astonishing. However, the divine demon still managed to dodge and did not counterattack. His injuries were very serious, and if he could not, of this, the divine demon, of the divine demon's body. The second sword light was also dodged, but then a third sword light followed. This third sword light was 30% stronger than the second sword light, becoming even more powerful and astonishing. Although the third sword light was even more powerful, it was still in the demigod realm, unable to truly threaten a principal god. The moment the divine demon dodged, a true sun appeared out of nowhere, as if it was suspended in the air, blooming with incomparable light and heat, dispelling the surrounding darkness and coldness, bringing with it hope and dawn. However, in the eyes of this divine demon, the light that symbolized hope and dawn was a kind of destruction. Tai Hao. This was the Tai Hao sword, Chunzong's most powerful sword move. Chunzong secretly followed and found the god fiend. He saw the god fiend coughing out a few mouthfuls of blood, and his aura was weak. With his powerful perception, he determined that the god fiend expert was seriously injured. Since that was the case, Chunzong decisively drew his sword and directly attacked. The first move was the sword one of the single-hearted sword technique, followed by the sword 2 and then the sword 3. Finally, Chunzong used the accumulated power of these moves to unleash the Tai Hao sword, causing the Tai Hao sword's power to reach its peak and become extremely powerful. Chunzong had practiced and simulated this move many times in his mind. Coupled with his extreme control of his body, it was as if success was achieved when the conditions were right. There was not the slightest bit of unfamiliarity, as if it had been practiced and practiced 1,000 times. The strongest sword move, which was even more powerful than before, was unleashed by Chunzong. It directly consumed 90% of Chunzong's mixed Yuan heart force. This was also a move that put one's life on the line. Not only did the Tai Hao sword contain extremely terrifying power, but its speed was also extremely fast. He could not dodge it. After dodging Chunzong's 3 moves consecutively, the divine demon master realized that he could not dodge this extremely powerful sword move. His whole body was completely locked on, as if he could not dodge it no matter how hard he tried. But more importantly, he, who was seriously injured, could not dodge Tai Hao's sword because the speed of the sword was so fast that it was shocking. What should he do? Since he could not dodge it, he could only unleash his power because the power of this sword move was so strong that it completely threatened him. If he was hit, his injuries would definitely worsen. Unleash. His right arm suddenly shook bringing about layers of illusions and sharp whistling sounds. A tyrannical force of chi shot out in an instant. The chi was filled with a water-like blue color, and it burst forth with an astonishing and vigorous aura like the waves of the sea. With a sudden swing, it seemed to have transformed into a long spear that pierced through the air. This divine demon master was proficient in the divine demon spear technique. If he had a spear in his hand, he would be able to unleash even more strength. Unfortunately, he had lost his spear in the fierce battle with the human race's saint-level experts and did not get it back in time. Now that he did not have a spear in his hand, even if his spear technique was extremely brilliant and he could transform his arm into a spear, he would not be as strong as if he had a spear in his hand. The spear shot out like the sea with astonishing power. It directly collided with the Tai House sword. In an instant, it paused and then exploded. A terrifying chi force surged and was extremely mighty. The astonishing power wreaked havoc in all directions, emitting a bright light. Even the firm ground was cut open one after another. It was a ghastly sight. Puff, puff, puff. Several mouthfuls of blood immediately spurted out from the divine demon's mouth. His whole body flew backward, and his injuries worsened more than twofold. His breath became increasingly disordered and weak. Run! Without hesitation, the divine demon immediately turned around and fled. His injuries worsened, and he could not help but feel terrified. At the same time, Chunzong also did not hesitate to absorb 5 level 1 false divinities, 2 level 2 false divinities, and 1 level 3 false divinity into his inner world. They expanded and danced like 8 giant dragons. As the inner world expanded and contracted, they were quickly refined. 90% of the mixed Yuan heart force was directly consumed and recovered at an astonishing speed. Almost in a breath, 10% of it was recovered. Chunzong also did not hesitate to use his body movement and burst out with an astonishing speed to chase after the divine demon. At the same time, his cultivation strength was constantly recovering. Almost every breath, 10% of it was recovered. This allowed Chunzong's speed to become faster and faster. On the other hand, the divine demon was already seriously injured and had not yet recovered. Then he was ambushed by Chunzong, especially under the Tai House sword, which aggravated his injuries. Now, as he fled in a panic, the power in his body went berserk, further aggravating his injuries and greatly affecting his speed. As Chunzong absorbed the 8 false divinities at all costs, not only did his mixed Yuan heart force recover to its peak, but his inner world also expanded and strengthened as a result, nourishing the mixed Yuan heart force and making it more tyrannical. This allowed Chunzong's inner world to approach the great accomplishment on the basis of the small accomplishment. In short, Chunzong's strength also increased as a result. He became more tyrannical and faster. Suddenly, Chunzong had an idea. He thought of the mystery of the divine Yang saber technique. He had extracted the essence of the mystery of the divine Yang saber technique and integrated it into the single-hearted swordsmanship. Why couldn't he integrate it into his footwork? The single-hearted origin realm not only allowed Chunzong to condense a more tyrannical mixed Yuan heart force, but also allowed Chunzong to be more efficient in comprehending. He took a step forward and the soles of his feet trembled slightly. When he landed, there was a slight sound that seemed to contain an indescribable mystery. The moment he took the second step, Chunzong's speed also increased by 30%. Then, when he took the third step, his speed increased by another 30%. Like an arrow leaving the bow, after 3 steps, Chunzong's speed reached its peak. He chased after the divine demon and immediately swung the sky sword. Sword 1, Sword 2, Sword 3. These 3 swords did not hit the opponent because there was still a certain distance between them. Even if they hit, they could not really threaten the opponent. Even if the divine demon was injured, the divine demon's body was still very tyrannical. Chunzong's purpose of using these 3 swords was to prepare to use the Tai House sword. The 3 swords were only used for a moment. Then the mixed Yuan heart force exploded and directly consumed 90% of it. A true sun appeared out of thin air. It emitted an amazing light and heat in an instant, dispelling the surrounding darkness and coldness, bringing a kind of dawn called destruction. It shone on all things, but it also purified them. Once purified, they would disappear, which was equivalent to destruction. Kill. The power of this sword strike was several times more tyrannical than the previous one. It represented the increase in Chunzong's strength. Moreover, after using this sword strike, the mixed Yuan heart force consumed by Chunzong was also recovering at an astonishing speed. It was only because the power of the 8 pseudo-divinities had yet to be completely absorbed. First, the divine demon immediately counterattacked, because if he did not, the consequences would only be more serious. However, the collision under the counterattack immediately multiplied his injuries. He flew backward and spat out blood as if it was free. This time, his injuries were even more serious. Although he was not dead yet, he was not far from death. The sword light flashed in midair and attacked again. The continuous flashes of light landed on the god fiend's body. Every strike was extremely precise, hitting the same spot on the god fiend's body. Strike after strike, strike after strike. The god fiend's body was unstoppable. Little Tai Hao. Another sword strike was launched. Although its power was not as strong as the real Tai Hao sword, it was not weak either. Under the continuous attacks of the sword techniques, which were focused on a single point, the fiend god's strong defense was finally broken. The long sword pierced into the fiend god's body, and the sword chi wreaked havoc and wreaked havoc. Chapter 2981. Give me a wave of monthly votes. Let little rice dumpling have a great harvest. Kill. Chunzong's face was full of excitement as he stared at the corpse in front of him. The excitement in his heart was surging like a raging tide. He had really killed a divine demon of the righteous god realm, which was equivalent to an expert of the pristine saint realm. He was only a quasi-saint. No matter how powerful he was still a quasi-saint. After taking a deep breath and exhaling slowly, Chunzong's excitement calmed down and returned to normal. Chunzong knew very well that this kind of kill could not be replicated, nor was it a reflection of his true strength. He was able to successfully kill the divine demon expert this time, because the divine demon expert was already severely injured. His injuries were so severe that his strength was greatly reduced. In addition, after he had obtained the divine sun saber technique, he had deduced its mystery and integrated it into his own swordsmanship. His strength had improved imperceptibly, and the power of the Tai Hao sword had also become more tyrannical. The combination of all these factors, coupled with a bit of luck and the negative influence of the unique environment of the ruins of world on the divine demon, but not on him, had created this scene and created such a brilliant battle record. If any of these factors had been slightly lacking, the result might have been different. This was really a case of seeking riches in danger. He felt the power in his body recovering continuously, but the speed of recovery was rapidly decreasing because the power of the 8 pseudo-divinities had really been exhausted. Chunzong moved and immediately broke open the divine demon expert's body and took out the divinity from his head. A divine demon expert at the righteous god realm was an expert who had ignited the divine fire. His divinity had already left its original form and turned into a flame-like form. However, it was not a real flame. It only looked like a flame, but it did not matter much. The divinity in this body was burning like a flame, and the aura it exuded was very strong and vigorous. There was also an indescribable mystery contained in it, which was unfathomable. The moment the divinity entered his hand, Chunzong immediately felt the fluctuations of the heaven and earth in his body, as if it was thirsting for this divinity. Chunzong also knew that if he absorbed this divinity, his inner heaven and earth would definitely benefit greatly. It would not be difficult to directly break through from the small success to the great success. He could even break through to a higher level, further increasing his strength and becoming more tyrannical. But no, the value of this divinity was extremely astonishing. It could be exchanged for at least 1,000 Tai profound coins in the Supreme Mystery Realm, or even higher, reaching more than 1,000 Tai profound coins. And this was related to Chunzong using the supreme mystery, heavenly mirror, to find someone again. Of course, the remaining Taishan coins could also be exchanged for other pseudo-divinities to absorb and improve his strength. Most fiend gods were born with extremely strong bodies, so they didn't need to intentionally temper their bodies. They only needed to increase their own strength, and their bodies would continuously strengthen to achieve the goal of body tempering. Coupled with the terrifying fiend god energy they possessed, they were extremely overbearing and powerful. When used to execute peerlessly powerful fiend god martial techniques, their strength would be extremely terrifying. At the same level, god-fiend experts were usually stronger. This was the norm. However, not all god-fiends had advantages. There were disadvantages as well. For example, god-fiends who had ignited their god fire would have their souls fused with their bodies. Once they were killed, their souls would dissipate. They would not be able to keep their souls alive like saint-level experts. They could not possess their bodies. Only when one reached the spiritual god realm of the great sage realm would their divine soul be independent of the body. Otherwise, this time, Chunzong killed this divine demon expert. If his divine soul became independent, it would be another big problem. He might even have to face the scene of being possessed again. A strand of flame-like divinity entered Chunzong's hand, and the might it contained made Chunzong extremely shocked and delighted. Subsequently, Chunzong took the fiend god expert's storage artifact and immediately fled at lightning speed. The battle aura that erupted here was very strong. It was hard to say whether it would attract other divine demon experts or human experts, but no matter what, it would not be a good thing. The value of a divine demon expert's divinity was astonishing. Even a great sage realm expert would not underestimate it. In front of benefits, not everyone could remain calm. About half an hour after Chunzong left, a black light approached quickly. Then, it paused and revealed a figure. It was a divine demon that looked like an eagle. It was a divine demon of the beast god clan. The aura it emitted was very tyrannical. It was a divine demon expert of the divine demon clan. His sharp gaze immediately landed on the corpse of the true god, level demonic god from the celestial god lineage. With a closer look, he could clearly see the injuries. After a quick examination, he came to a conclusion about how the demonic god had died. How unlucky! The divine demon of the beast god clan sneered. The three divine clans in the divine demon realm were not friendly. On the contrary, there were many conflicts. Therefore, when he saw the corpse of a divine demon expert of a different divine clan, not only did he not feel sorry, he only took pleasure in others' misfortune. Fortunately, Chunzong had left. Half an hour was enough for him to go far away. In addition, in the chaotic environment of the ruins of world, his aura had already dissipated. It was impossible to chase after him with just his aura. With the guidance of the Taishan token, Chunzong left quickly and flew in the direction of the stronghold of the ruins of world in the Taishan secret realm. Especially after integrating the mysteries of the divine Yang saber technique into his footwork, the first step was extremely fast. The second step began to break through the limit, and the third step was even faster. Like an arrow leaving the bowstring, Chunzong was also comprehending the fourth step and the fourth sword while performing the third step. It was a pity that he did not obtain the follow-up of the divine Yang saber technique. Otherwise, he could directly comprehend the mysteries within and then extract and integrate them, which would be even more efficient. If he only comprehended it on his own, even with Chunzong's strong comprehension and the assistance of the One Heart Sutra, it would not be so easy to deduce it. Chunzong's luck was pretty good. On his way back, he encountered 2 rank 1 demigod godfiends and 2 rank 2 demigod godfiends. Although they weren't weak, they were nothing to Chunzong. He killed them as fast as he could without mercy. The environment of the ruins of world was indeed terrifying. Whether it was the cultivators of the ancient profound world or the divine demons of the divine demon realm, it would affect them to a certain extent, causing their strength to weaken imperceptibly. However, it did not affect Chunzong at all. Thinking of this, Chunzong's thoughts flew. For some reason, he thought of the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's divine demon sword codex. The Divine Demon Sword Codex's characteristic was that it could absorb all kinds of energy, whether it was positive energy, negative energy, or chaotic energy. It could absorb all kinds of energy. In a place like the Ruins of World, could it be absorbed as well? Thinking of this, Chunzong felt that the Divine Demon Sword Lord's plan was very grand, especially the fourth stage of the Divine Demon Sword Codex. If he wanted to master it, he would have to absorb the divinity of the divine demons. That was indeed the case. Because the sword-sharpening mountain lord had known about the existence of the divine demon realm many years ago. He might have even killed the divine demons of the divine demon realm and obtained their divinity. As for the sword-sharpening mountain lord's ascension to true God, he should not be the kind of true God in the divine demon realm. He should be an existence that surpassed the sacred realm. As his thoughts flew, Chunzong also retracted his thoughts. What true God? It was too far away from him. What's more, whether it existed or not was another matter. He felt that the sword-sharpening mountain lord should be fumbling around. Right now, what he needed to do was to find Yunyin Xin and raise his cultivation and strength at the same time to break through to the saint rank. Once he had the strength of a saint rank, he would be able to better control his own fate. Leaving the Ruins of World once again and returning to the stronghold, he saw Chunzong again. Those people were a little numb and ignored him. Chunzong once again crossed the shattered space and headed towards the supreme mystery realm. At this moment, Chunzong's heart was excited. Why was he excited? Although he had used up the 8 pseudo-divinities, he still had more than 600 Taishian coins. In addition, he had killed 4 demigod divine demons on the way back and obtained 2 rank 1 pseudo-divinities and 2 rank 2 pseudo-divinities, which were worth 60 Taishian coins. As for the daring god divine demon he had killed and obtained its divinity, it was worth at least 1,000 Taishian coins, which added up to a total of 1,660 Taishian coins. But that was not all. Chunzong also found a treasure that was suspected to be a ruined treasure in the demigod divine demon storage artifact. It was a fist-sized black metal with a rough surface that weighed 10,000 kilograms. It seemed to be able to absorb all light, but it also faintly reflected strands of golden light. The aura contained within the metal was very mysterious. There was an indescribable thickness and sharpness that was nurtured within it. Chunzong suspected that it was a ruined treasure. As for whether it was or not, he would know when he handed it over for appraisal. If it was, it would be an additional harvest. It was also possible that it was not a ruined treasure, but a kind of metal from the divine demon realm. It was hard to say. In any case, Chunzong could already get 1,000 Taishian coins for using the Supreme Mystery Heavenly Mirror again. Naturally, he had to use the Supreme Mystery Heavenly Mirror to check it first. His luck was good. The true Void Grand Sage was still in the Supreme Mystery Realm. You killed a demigod divine demon. The true Void Grand Sage's expression was shocked. It was indescribable shock that came from the bottom of his heart. A quasi-sage killed a demigod divine demon, which was equivalent to killing a demigod divine demon. How shocking was that? He had lived for so long, but this was the first time he had heard of such a thing. It just so happened that the demigod divine demon was seriously injured and did not have much strength left. Otherwise, the one who would have died would be me, Chunzong replied. He did not exaggerate, but was very modest. However, no matter what the situation was at that time, Chunzong killed a demigod divine demon at the quasi-sage level. Most of the time, the process was not so important. The result was the most important. Immediately, Chunzong took out the black metal that was suspected to be a ruined treasure and handed it to the true Void Grand Sage, asking him to appraise it. It is indeed a ruined treasure. After the true Void Grand Sage sensed it, he said with certainty, as for what kind of ruined treasure it is, it has yet to be verified. Wait a moment. What he meant was that this was not a ruined treasure recorded in the Supreme Mystery Ruined Treasure Book, but a new kind of ruined treasure. He did not ask Chunzong to wait for too long. After only an hour, the true Void Grand Sage returned with the black metal. Chapter 2982. This item is a kind of ruined treasure that has not been recorded in the Taishian Ruined Treasure Book. It could be considered a newly discovered ruined treasure in our Taishian ruins. According to its characteristics, it is temporarily named Black Divine Gold. It is suitable for forging divine weapons and sacred weapons. After initial appraisal, its value should be 2,000 Taishan coins. In addition, it can increase the number of entries in the Taishan Ruins treasure book, so it will be rewarded with 100 Taishan coins. The true Void Grand Sage smiled and said to Chunzong, "Of course, if you don't want to give this item to Taishan, then you will only get 100 Taishan coins." Exchange. Chunzong thought for a moment and immediately made a decision. This Black Divine Gold might be very good and could be used to forge powerful divine weapons and sacred weapons, but it was not of much use to him because it could not be used to strengthen the Heavenly Will Sword. The Heavenly Will Sword was now one with him and was born from the inner world. As long as the inner world became stronger, the power of the Heavenly Will Sword would also increase without any external force. The Black Divine Gold could not improve the inner world either. Only divinities could directly help the cultivation of the inner world. The true Void Grand Sage nodded and quickly gave Chunzong 2,100 Taishan coins. In this way, not counting the pseudo-divinities and the true divinity, he had 2,700 Taishan coins. It was an amazing wealth that even many pristine Saint Realm experts were envious of. "Senior, here is 1,000 Taishan coins. Please help me." Chunzong took out 1,000 Taishan coins and stared at the true Void Grand Sage. "Okay." The true Void Grand Sage smiled and helped Chunzong open the Taishan Heavenly Mirror again. The appraisal of 1,000 Taishan coins was not something that 100 Taishan coins could compare to. It was even more amazing. In an instant, ripples appeared on the Taishan Heavenly Mirror as if a stone had fallen into water. As the ripples spread out, a picture appeared. The interval between this time and the last time he used the Taishan Heavenly Mirror was not long. It had only been a little more than a month. What appeared on the picture was still a fiery red. It was a blazing red with countless flames burning fiercely. The degree of clarity was much better than the first time. In the midst of the fiery red, there was the shadow of a firebird circling around. Sometimes it would soar into the sky, and sometimes it would descend from the sky. A figure quickly appeared. The figure was sitting cross-legged in the raging flames, and there were 9 firebirds circling around him. Every one of them had a different posture, and they all exuded an indescribable mystery. That figure was rapidly becoming clearer. Chunzong narrowed his eyes as he stared at it. Light flickered in his eyes, and he was secretly excited. Suddenly, wisps of golden light appeared in the distance and turned into a ball of blazing flame. It burned fiercely and exploded, turning into the shape of a phoenix. It suddenly flew across the sky. Its trajectory had an indescribable mystery, as if it was in accordance with some kind of mystery in the world. It made Chunzong feel as if it was about to rush out and penetrate the Taishan Heavenly Mirror to kill him. In an instant, Chunzong felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself not to retreat. There seemed to be a cracking sound in his ears, and the picture on the Taishan Heavenly Mirror shattered again. It was as if the Taishan Heavenly Mirror had been shattered. This scene was the same as the last time. Chunzong frowned and was somewhat unwilling. That figure must be Nianxin. It was just that before he could see it clearly, it had already been disturbed. At this moment, the true Void Great Sage frowned, as if he was thinking about something. "Chunzong, I should already know where your Taoist companion is," the true Void Great Sage said after some time. The true Void Grand Sage spoke after a long while, but his brows were still furrowed and his tone was a little hesitant. This made Chunzong feel that this seemed to be a troublesome matter for no reason. "Please tell me." At this point, no matter what trouble it was, Chunzong had to face it, overcome it, and get through it. "Oh." The true Void Great Sage stared at Chunzong, and after thinking for a while, he said, "If I'm not wrong, that should be the ancestral land of the ancient Phoenix Mountain." "Ancient Phoenix Mountain?" Chunzong's expression suddenly changed, and he could not believe it. How could it be the ancient Phoenix Mountain? The ancient Phoenix goddess had said that she did not know Nianxin. Previously, the true Void Great Sage had asked someone to inquire about the ancient Phoenix Mountain, but there was no such person as Nianxin. How could it be? How could it be? For a moment, Chunzong's thoughts were in a mess. The person who broke the power of the Taishan heavenly mirror should be the golden phoenix grand sage of the ancient Phoenix Mountain, the true void great sage said. The golden phoenix grand sage is also a strong cultivator in the great sage realm. Most importantly, she has a temper and is very difficult to deal with. Even if I were to appear, she might not give me face. Fine, this old man will go with you. Looking at Chunzong's determined eyes, the true void great sage suddenly sighed. But before that, I suggest you exchange for some pseudo-divinity to absorb and improve your strength as much as possible. The stronger you are, the better. Okay. Chunzong vaguely understood what the true void great sage meant. Strong strength was a guarantee, no matter where. In that case, you should prepare first. After you're ready, we'll set off, the true void great sage said in a serious voice. Okay. Chunzong also understood that sharpening the axe would not delay the work of cutting firewood. It was better to be prepared first before taking action. Since the true void great sage wanted him to do this, there must be a reason. Then, he would just delay it for a while. Fortunately, the way he refined and absorbed divinity was different from other cultivators. It was easier and faster. After refining and absorbing several pseudo-divinities, his inner world was further expanded and strengthened, but still did not break the limit of the small success and advance to the large success. This time, I'll use this righteous divinity. Chunzong thought to himself. His eyes flickered endlessly as he stared at the flame-like divinity in his hand. He felt the violent fluctuations coming from his inner world. It was a kind of desire, an incomparably strong desire. In the next moment, the true divinity was absorbed into the inner world of the human body. It immediately swelled and turned into a blazing sun that burned in the air. Wisps of power continued to spread out and integrated into the inner world, causing the inner world to strengthen at an alarming rate. Vigorous, powerful. The power contained in this righteous divinity was simply too amazing. It made Chunzong feel that his inner world was a little stuffed. Then his inner world expanded to the limit of the small success, broke through, and expanded again. Large success. His inner world had reached the large success level, and the power of the mixed Yuan heart force was even stronger and more vigorous. Such power was equivalent to a rank 3 demigod divine demon. Coupled with Chunzong's superb, single-hearted sword art, his strength surpassed the majority of rank 3 demigod divine demons and could easily kill them. However, the power of the righteous divinity was not completely exhausted. Only a small part of it was consumed. His inner world was still constantly improving, and the mixed Yuan heart force was also becoming more and more tyrannical. Even Chunzong's comprehension of the single-hearted sword art was rapidly increasing. The mysteries of ancient sword arts were constantly integrated into the single-hearted sword art, and the power of the single-hearted sword art was constantly increasing. The power of the righteous divinity was indeed astonishing. It raised Chunzong's inner world from the small success level to the large success level, and finally stabilized at the peak of the large success level. The limit. Chunzong felt that his inner world had reached a limit, but Chunzong also felt that this was not the final limit, and that he could continue to break through. Then he would exchange for another righteous divinity. He still had 1,700 Tai profound coins left, which was enough to exchange. Spending 1,000 Tai profound coins, Chunzong directly exchanged for a righteous divinity and absorbed it without hesitation. His inner world was constantly accumulating power, but the limit trial was very stable, so stable that it was frightening. No matter how hard it was attacked, it was difficult to break through in a short period of time. The righteous divinity's power was constantly being consumed, and the accumulated power of the inner world was also growing stronger. When the righteous divinity's power was completely exhausted, the accumulated power of the inner world had also reached the limit. It suddenly erupted and directly attacked, majestic like a flood breaking through a dam. The power that burst forth in an instant was extremely terrifying, causing Chun Zong's body to tremble uncontrollably. His ears were constantly ringing with rumbling sounds. Breakthrough. The limit trial was finally broken through, and his inner world expanded in an instant, more than doubling in size. Previously, when he broke through to the small success level, his inner world expanded by 30%, and from the small success level to the large success level, his inner world expanded by 50%. Now that he had broken through to the large success level, his inner world had doubled in size. The extent of such an increase was astonishing and even more tyrannical. The mixed Yuan heart force also became more tyrannical, and its power increased with the breakthrough of his inner world. Chun Zong suddenly exhaled a long breath. The breath was invisible and colorless, but it was like a sharp sword cutting through the air, leaving a clear trace in the air. The breath became a sword, and the breath became a wind. If the inner world is equivalent to rank 1 demigod realm, the small success level to rank 2 demigod realm, and the large success level to rank 3 demigod realm, then what about my current inner world? Chun Zong secretly pondered. He was sure that in terms of cultivation strength, he was several times stronger than a rank 3 demigod realm divine demon. Coupled with his superb swordsmanship, his strength was far stronger than a rank 3 demigod realm divine demon. Chun Zong didn't know how to define his current level of strength, but he was sure that his cultivation hadn't broken through to the true saint realm. According to his deduction, if he wanted to break through to the saint realm, his inner world would have to undergo a huge transformation, and it wouldn't be a simple expansion. Chun Zong didn't have any clue as to what kind of exchange it would be. He still needed time to deduce it. Then, his current cultivation should still be at the quasi-saint realm, not the saint realm. However, could his strength be comparable to a saint realm divine demon? While thinking, Chun Zong couldn't be sure. After all, he hadn't fought with his full strength. Previously, he was able to kill the demigod realm divine demon because the divine demon expert was severely injured. Coupled with his surprise attack, the replenishment of 8 false divinity, the suppression of the ruins of world's environment, and the fact that the demigod realm divine demon had lost its spear, which weakened its strength. If it was a demigod realm divine demon at its peak, would he be able to fight it? Chapter 2983. The true Void Grand Sage was a great saint. The great way he mastered was the way of the void shattering. It was a great way with terrifying offensive power. Using this great way to travel was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but the effect was great. First, they left the great mystery realm. Then, they left the sealed heaven ancient region and headed for the ancient phoenix domain. If Chun Zong traveled alone, it would take a few days to reach the ancient phoenix domain from the sealed heaven ancient region. Then, it would take a few more days to reach the ancient phoenix mountain. In total, it would take 10 days. But with the true Void Grand Sage, they arrived in less than half a day. The ancient Phoenix Mountain was a majestic mountain range that towered above the earth. There were a total of 99 mountain peaks that formed the mountain. Looking from afar, the mountain peak in the middle was the tallest, most majestic, and also the largest. The 4 mountain peaks on the left and right were smaller and lower, while the mountain peaks further to the side were even lower. Moreover, they seemed to be converging towards the front. If one looked from above, they would find that the 99 peaks formed an arc like a crescent moon. Looking at it as a whole, the 99 peaks of the ancient Phoenix Mountain looked like a giant bird that was about to break through the ground and soar into the sky. Half of its body was still below the ground, while the other half was already above the ground. Just this appearance alone was enough to make people feel extremely surprised. With Chun Zong's extraordinary perception, he could faintly sense an indescribable aura lingering within the ancient Phoenix Mountain. That aura was extremely tyrannical, incomparably vigorous, and indescribable. It seemed to possess an incomparably terrifying might. If it were to erupt, it would be enough to destroy everything. "Let's go," the true Void Grand Sage said to Chun Zong. "Later, don't say anything. Leave it to me." "Yes," Chun Zong replied. "I am the true Void Grand Sage. I am here to visit the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage." The true void great sage appeared in front of the main gate of the ancient Phoenix Mountain and instantly spoke. His voice was powerful to the extreme and was transmitted into the ancient Phoenix Mountain. His voice was gentle and wouldn't cause anyone to feel that it was too abrupt and would affect their actions. After all, he was here to visit, not to cause trouble. But a great saint coming to visit was a big deal. Instantly, countless people in the ancient Phoenix Mountain were shocked and excited. Then, a powerful aura spread out. It was a saint-level cultivator from the ancient Phoenix Mountain who had appeared to welcome the true void great sage. A blazing red light flew out from within the ancient Phoenix Mountain and appeared above the mountain gate, directly facing the true void grand sage and Shunzo. His entire body was surrounded by fire, like a firebird spreading its wings. It was a middle-aged man. "I am ancient Phoenix Mountain's heavenly Phoenix Saint. Greetings, great saint of true void." The middle-aged man immediately bowed to great saint of true void. The difference in strength between the pristine saint stage and the eminent saint stage was very obvious. Therefore, under normal circumstances, when a pristine saint stage powerhouse faced an eminent saint stage powerhouse, they would usually have to bow respectfully to show their respect. After all, many pristine saint stage powerhouses were unable to break through to the eminent saint stage in their entire lives. This clearly showed how shocking the gap was. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage is now in the ancestral land. "What is the matter, true Void Grand Sage?" The Heavenly Phoenix Grand Sage asked again. Maintaining respect was necessary, but there was no need to bow and scrape. After all, it was not easy for an eminent saint stage powerhouse to kill a pristine saint stage powerhouse. As long as a pristine saint stage powerhouse was determined to escape, there was more than a 50% chance of success. Of course, some injuries were inevitable. As for the 95% chance of death, an eminent saint stage powerhouse was still much stronger than a pristine saint stage powerhouse. However, this was much better. It should be known that a quasi-saint stage powerhouse could not resist a saint-level powerhouse. There was not even a 1 in 1,000 chance of escaping. Furthermore, the ancient Phoenix Mountain was a holy land. Unless it was a divine ancestor stage powerhouse, they would not bow their heads. "I have something important to discuss with the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage," the true Void Grand Sage said calmly. His words contained an extremely terrifying power. The void around him seemed to be about to shatter, which made the Heavenly Phoenix Grand Sage secretly shocked. "If that is the case, please rest in the mountain. I will report to the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage." The Heavenly Phoenix Grand Sage said, "I will wait here." The true Void Grand Sage had no intention of entering the ancient Phoenix Mountain. Shunzo did not speak, and the Heavenly Phoenix Grand Sage only glanced at Shunzo. He probably thought that Shunzo was the true Void Grand Sage's junior or disciple. If he was not a saint-level powerhouse, why should he pay attention to him? The true Void Grand Sage insisted on meeting the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage because of the results of the Supreme Mystery Heaven appraisal. Although the appraisal was interrupted, it was certain that the person Shunzo was looking for, Yunyunshin, was with the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. The true Void Grand Sage speculated that it was the ancestral land of the ancient Phoenix Mountain. The person suspected to be Yunyunshin was cultivating in the ancestral land, while the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage guarded the ancestral land. As such, it was the most direct way to find the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. Wait. Next, they just had to wait. 15 minutes passed. 30 minutes passed. In an instant, golden light filled the sky and turned into golden flames that burned endlessly. It directly dyed half of the sky and filled the air with an unparalleled power. In the golden light that covered half of the sky, the shadow of a phoenix appeared. It soared into the sky and let out a long cry. It was extremely resounding, like the sound of God. It approached rapidly and appeared outside the mountain gate. It turned into an old woman wearing a golden robe and holding a phoenix head staff. This old woman had a head full of silver hair. Although she looked old, there were not many wrinkles on her face. Her eyes were long and narrow and gave off a very sharp feeling. Her face was stiff and she did not smile much. Just by looking at her face, Chenzong knew that she was not an easy person to get along with. Old thing, why are you looking for me? Don't you know that I'm very busy now? The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage opened her mouth, and her words were very sharp. Her voice was even sharper, like a sharp blade that pierced through the air. Chenzong was slightly stunned. On the face of the true Void Grand Sage, an awkward expression appeared, but it disappeared quickly. It seemed like the true Void Grand Sage and the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage were old acquaintances. Perhaps they had something to do with each other. However, this had nothing to do with Chenzong, and it was not something that Chenzong should investigate. Golden Phoenix, I am here for something, said the true Void Grand Sage seriously. If you have something to say, say it. I am very busy. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage did not hold back. I am here to find someone, a person called Yunyin. The true Void Grand Sage laughed bitterly and said directly, Yunyin? The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage frowned slightly. Is there someone called Yunyin in the mountain? Reporting to Grand Sage, there is no such person. Immediately, a voice rang out. Old thing, did you hear that? You have come to the wrong place. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage screamed and turned to leave. Wait. The true Void Grand Sage immediately said, Golden Phoenix, you should know that the Taishian Heavenly Mirror will not be wrong. So, you were the one who spied on me twice. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's expression changed and became extremely cold. A frightening aura erupted from her body and golden flames spread. It was as if they could burn everything, including the void space. Don't do it. The true Void Grand Sage was shocked and immediately said, This little brother is Chenzong. He joined the Taishian Heavenly Mirror not long ago. He used the Taishian Heavenly Mirror to search for his Taoist partner. According to the Taishian Heavenly Mirror, Chenzong's Taoist partner, Yunyin, is at the ancient Phoenix Mountain. I suspect that she is at the ancient Phoenix Mountain within the ancestral grounds. If you want to find your Taoist partner, go somewhere else. There is no one at the ancient Phoenix Mountain. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's expression became colder and colder. His tone became colder and colder. When he looked at Chenzong, the golden flames in his eyes seemed to burn. This caused Chenzong to go into a daze. In that instant, he felt as if he was being burned by a flame. That feeling was too frightening. Fortunately, Chenzong had reached the complete inner world, and his mixed Yuan heart force was much stronger. He was able to escape. Senior, may I know what I have to do to meet that person? Chenzong said sincerely, I have been searching for a Taoist partner for many years. I have searched everywhere, but could not find her. Now that there is finally news, I hope that you can help me. I will remember this kindness and repay you generously in the future. Just meet her. Once he saw her personally, he would be able to confirm whether or not she was Yunyin. Repay you generously? You are not even a sage. What are you talking about? What a joke. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage mocked him directly. However, a strange expression appeared on her face. However, since you asked for it, and this old thing brought you here, I will give you a chance. Senior, please tell me. Chenzong was overjoyed. The true Void Grand Sage frowned slightly. He had a bad feeling. Let me say this first. The person you want to see is in the ancestral lands. She will not come out to meet you. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage smiled. At most, I will let you know her identity. It was undoubtedly a great pity that he could not see her personally. However, since she was in the ancestral lands, it was normal that she could not appear, unless she was done with her closed-door training. But taking a step back, knowing the other party's identity was also a form of progress, a form of help. Okay, I agree. Chenzong took a deep breath and replied. His tone was low and powerful, and his determination was unquestionable. Very good. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage smiled weirdly. Heavenly Phoenix, come here. The Heavenly Phoenix Grand Sage appeared once again. She stood in the void 10 meters away from the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage and bowed. What orders do you have for me? Her attitude was clearly different from how she treated the true Void Grand Sage. Heavenly Phoenix, attack him. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage pointed at Chenzong and said, Junior, you only need to withstand one attack from the Heavenly Phoenix and not die. Then, I will tell you the identity of the person you're looking for." The true Void Grand Sage's expression changed, and he immediately said, "No." A Saint Stage powerhouse, even a pristine Saint Stage powerhouse, would be able to crush a second saint. Although Chunzong had a record of killing a divine demon, Chunzong himself said very clearly that he was just taking advantage of the situation. The divine demon was severely injured. However, this was a sage at her peak. Even if she did not use her full strength, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's words were very clear. If Chunzong was not careful, he could be killed. Even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. It might even affect his foundation. "Thank you for your kindness, Senior. However, I accept it," Chunzong said firmly. The Heavenly Phoenix Saint was a primordial saint realm expert. He was not sure how strong she was, but she was still a primordial saint realm expert. Although his current strength was not weak, he might not be as strong as a primordial saint realm expert, but he should be able to protect himself. Since that was the case, he might as well give it his all. After all, this was an opportunity. If he missed it, he did not know what to do. Chapter 2984. Outside the ancient Phoenix Mountain, above the vast sky, the heavenly wind whistled endlessly, and a tyrannical aura spread out. The invisible aura contained an indescribable solemnity and desolation. The Heavenly Phoenix Saint sneered as he stared at Chunzong. As if judging the situation, he clasped his hands behind his back and said, "Junior, I'll give you 30 breaths of time to prepare. After 30 breaths, I will strike." The true Void Great Sage could not stop him because this was Chunzong's own choice. Even if he was killed because of this, it was Chunzong's choice. Chunzong was not a child, but an adult. He should be responsible for his own words, actions, and all his choices. Of course, the true Void Great Sage was very optimistic about Chunzong. Naturally, he would not really watch Chunzong be killed. Once there was a life-threatening crisis, he would also step in to save Chunzong, but it would also be a failure. In the face of a pristine saint expert, Chunzong did not dare to have the slightest carelessness. Accumulating power, the mixed Yuan heart force was constantly mobilized, circulating at full strength. In the face of a pristine saint expert, Chunzong did not dare to have the slightest carelessness. The heavenly will sword also appeared in his hand. Time passed, one breath after another, and each breath seemed to become longer. After 30 breaths of time, the Heavenly Phoenix Saint's eyes suddenly widened. A terrifying light burst out, as if there were two scarlet flames burning fiercely, exuding an astonishing heat. Immediately after, the Heavenly Phoenix Saint made his move. He suddenly swung his right arm, directly rolling up a blazing and violent flame, surging across the vast sky in an instant. The flame was extremely red, burning the void, as if it could burn everything into ashes. The aura that filled the air was so terrifying that Chunzong was shocked. Strong. The power of this blow was very tyrannical, so tyrannical that it made Chunzong's heart skip a beat. It was even more terrifying than the Heavenly Dragon Holy Land's saint-level expert who chased after him. Of course, it was also possible that the Heavenly Dragon Holy Land saint-level expert did not use his full strength. A sharp and resounding cry resounded, shaking the sky. Blazing scarlet flames instantly condensed into the shape of a scarlet flame phoenix. The flames burned incessantly, and its wings suddenly flapped. It immediately erupted with unparalleled speed, carrying with it an extremely terrifying power that could destroy and incinerate everything. It instantly shattered space and charged over. The distance between Chunzong and the Heavenly Phoenix Saint was only 100 meters, and this distance was covered in an instant. The path of the Scarlet Flame Phoenix's wings was pitch black. It was as if the void had been scorched. It was a ghastly sight. Chunzong's eyelids twitched involuntarily. Then, his pupils constricted to the size of needles. A bright light shot out from his eyes as he slashed out with his sword. "Burn!" Chunzong's eyes. Chunzong, the sun, great sun, sun, great, across the sky, sky across the sky, the sun, the sky, great sun, great, the sun, sky, sky, sun, 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 Sunday. As the sword slashed out, the sun seemed to be propelled forward, and its speed reached its peak in an instant. Tai Hao. This was Chunzong's primordial heart force, of immemorial heart force, of inner heaven and earth. He had unleashed 80% of his primordial heart force, and its power was several times stronger than before. Tai Hao already had the power of the Saint stage. After being strengthened several times, his power became even more powerful and shocking. The grand sun hung in the sky, burning fiercely. It was vast and boundless. The domineering sword might covered the heavens and earth. Instantly, the expressions of the true Void Grand Sage and the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage changed. They were in disbelief. Quasi-sage level. A quasi-saint was actually able to unleash such a tyrannical sword move. Such power had directly crossed over to the sage realm. Even among the sage realm, he wasn't at the bottom. The heavenly phoenix saint was equally shocked. She couldn't believe it and thought it was an illusion. The 10-meter-long crimson, flaming phoenix burned the void and attacked. Tai Hao's grand sun slashed across the sky and collided with it. Time and space seemed to have stopped because of this, and then it exploded. The phoenix's high-pitched screech reverberated through the heavens and earth and shook the 9 heavens. The terrifying Tai Hao sword's power shook the heavens and earth. It was invincible. Everything within a radius of a few thousand meters was filled with the scorching aura. This aura's temperature was extremely high, and it burned everything. It also contained a frightening sharpness, and it tore through everything. The true Void Grand Sage and the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage didn't move at all. Although the aftershock was powerful, it didn't threaten them. Chunzong retreated quickly, and he avoided the aftershock. The Heavenly Phoenix Saint waved her sleeves and blocked the aftershock. There was a huge difference between being a true Saint-level expert and not being a true Saint-level expert. You can block it. The Heavenly Phoenix Saint's voice was full of shock. "Ha, good lad." The true Void Grand Sage burst into laughter. This was unexpected. Chunzong's power was unexpected. Perhaps that sword was Chunzong's trump card, but its power was unexpected. Many times, it could even change the outcome of a battle. He didn't expect a quasi-sage to be able to master such a sword, and he didn't even rely on some treasure. It was really shocking. In contrast to the true Void Grand Sage's excitement, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage was shocked. His expression turned cold, and his eyes became sharper. His originally long and narrow eyes looked even more powerful and threatening. He stared at Chunzong, and immediately, Chunzong felt immense pressure. This pressure came from the bottom of his heart, and it was terrifying. "Senior, have I passed?" Chunzong looked at the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage, and he suppressed the pressure in his heart and asked, "Humph." The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage snorted coldly and immediately turned into a ray of golden light that shot into the sky. He exploded with unparalleled speed and disappeared into the ancient Phoenix Mountain. "Senior." Chunzong panicked. How could he go back on his words? "Let's go," the true Void Grand Sage said. "Senior, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage hasn't said anything yet." Chunzong said hurriedly, and he was anxious. "She has already told me who is cultivating in the ancient Phoenix Mountain ancestral land." The true Void Grand Sage said. "Who is it?" Chunzong immediately stared at the true Void Grand Sage, and his gaze was sharp and shocking. "The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden." The true Void Grand Sage replied. "What?" Chunzong was shocked, and he was extremely shocked. "The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. How could it be her?" The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. Chunzong had seen her before. Although he did not see her real face, he had indeed seen her before. Moreover, he had been in close contact with her and talked to her. At that time, he had asked her if she knew Nianxin, and she had said that she did not. If she was really Nianxin, how could she say that she did not know him? If she was really Nianxin, how could she not recognize him? Could it be that there was some mystery behind this? The Taishian Heavenly Mirror has never made any big mistakes, but it does not mean that it is absolutely correct. It can only be said that most of it is correct. The true Void Grand Sage said slowly, "This time, the Taishian heavenly mirror may be right this time. The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden in the ancient Phoenix Mountain Ancestral Land and your Taoist companion Yunyinxin are the same person, but something must have happened that caused her to not recognize you. Could it be that she lost her memory?" Chunzong suddenly remembered that Yunyinxin was attacked by the Infernal Order at that time, and she was probably also injured. Although she survived, it was not impossible for her to have lost her memory. After losing her memory, Yunyinxin somehow wandered into the ancient mystic world and became the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden of the ancient Phoenix Mountain by chance. Although it sounded very mysterious, there was indeed a slight possibility. After all, Yunyinxin's own bloodline was related to the Phoenix. She had obtained some opportunities in the ancient Phoenix Mountain by chance, and her bloodline had improved greatly. It was also possible that she had become the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. As for the other point, it was that the Taishian Heavenly Mirror's findings were wrong. However, the two appraisals were the same, so there should not be any mistakes. The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden was Yunyinxin. For some unknown reason, Yunyinxin had lost her memory. Since he knew that the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden was Yunyinxin, Chunzong heaved a sigh of relief. At least he now knew where she was, and he also knew her identity. She was the Divine Maiden of the ancient Phoenix Mountain. Her identity was extremely high, and normally, she would not be in any danger. Chunzong, if you want to see your Taoist companion again, there is only one way. The true Void Grand Sage said to Chunzong seriously. Chunzong also listened. Become stronger. If you had the strength of a great saint today, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage would not have been able to stop you. If you had the strength of a divine ancestor today, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage would still treat you with respect. The true Void Grand Sage's voice was low, but he stated a fact. "Senior, I understand." Chunzong exhaled and replied in a low and powerful voice. Strength, strength, no matter where it was, could not escape from the word strength. The strong were supreme, and the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage was obviously not an easy person to deal with. It was not that easy to see Yunyinxin. Furthermore, Yunyinxin was still in seclusion, and he did not know when she would come out. Wait here for her to come out? That was one way, but it was not feasible. If he waited here, how long would he have to wait? In the process of waiting, it would be difficult for his strength to increase. If he wanted to break through to the next level, he did not know how long it would take. Furthermore, even if he saw Yunyinxin, she did not recognize him. If he took her away by force, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage would not sit by and do nothing. In the end, it was still strength. Then, he should leave here first, and then go to the ruins of world. Yes, only by going to the ruins of world, killing more gods and demons, and obtaining more divinity, could his strength increase at a faster speed in a short period of time. He could then break through to the holy level and master more power. With his mind made up, Chunzong followed the true Void Grand Sage back to the Taishian secret realm. Senior, thank you very much this time. Chunzong saluted the true Void Grand Sage. I want to go to the ruins of world again and do my best to increase my strength. Fine. With your strength, even ordinary quintessence god fiends might not be able to kill you easily. The true Void Grand Sage thought of Chunzong's tyrannical sword and immediately nodded. However, you still have to be careful. Senior, I know. Chunzong nodded and saluted the true Void Grand Sage again. Then he exchanged the remaining 700 Taishian coins for third-order pseudo-divinity. He exchanged 17 in total and prepared to replenish the mixed Yuan heart force when it was severely depleted. Chapter 2985. 17 third-order pseudo-divinities were not enough for Chunzong's inner world to make a further breakthrough. At most, it would increase his strength a little further on the original foundation. Therefore, Chunzong did not plan to use them. Instead, he wanted to use them as treasures to quickly replenish the mixed Yuan heart force. It was like an elixir, but the effect was 10 times better than an elixir, and there were no side effects. With 17 third-order pseudo-divinities, Chunzong would have the courage to fight even if he encountered a divine demon expert of the righteous god level. If he could kill another divine demon expert of the righteous god level and obtain its divinity, the effect would definitely be better than 17 third-order pseudo-divinities. There was a clear difference between pseudo-divinities and divinities. The lowest level of righteous divinity could be worth 1,000 Tai Xian coins. The more powerful righteous divinity would be worth 2,000 to 3,000 Tai Xian coins. As for the divinity of a divine demon expert of the spiritual god level, it was directly measured in tens of thousands. Unfortunately, there was no divine demon expert of the spiritual god level in Tai Xian coins. It was equivalent to the level of a great saint expert. Once it appeared, a great saint expert would be moved and take action. Not to mention divine demon expert of the spiritual god level, there were not many righteous divinities in Tai Xian coins. In addition to exchanging 17 pseudo-divinities, Chunzong also studied the treasure book of the Tai Xian ruins and memorized all the 30 ruins treasures recorded in it, so that he would not miss it when he encountered a ruins treasure because he did not understand it. Although there were only 30 ruins treasures recorded in it, it was better than nothing. This was the 4th time Chunzong stepped into the ruins of the world. It was still the same 9 experts guarding it. It was not time for them to change shifts yet. When they saw Chunzong, they were slightly surprised but still did not say anything. However, some people could not help but mutter in their hearts that he was treating the ruins of the world as his own home. Otherwise, what was he going to do by entering and exiting so many times in such a short period of time without any damage? After verifying the Tai Xian token, Chunzong stepped into the dark crack and disappeared again as if he was swallowed. When he entered the ruins of the world again, Chunzong felt the oppression and darkness of the ruins of the world. The impact on him seemed to be smaller, but this was also related to his own strength. His inner world had reached perfection. This level of strength had completely surpassed the quasi-saint tier, surpassing the demigod tier, and infinitely close to the true saint tier. Although Chunzong had only exchanged one blow with the ancient Phoenix Mountain's heavenly Phoenix Saint, he knew how powerful he was now. Even if he encountered a pristine saint stage cultivator or a divine demon stage expert, he would still be able to put up a fight. After all, he didn't use his full strength to display the great sword. According to Senior True Saint, Heavenly Phoenix Saint was one of the more powerful pristine saints in ancient Phoenix Mountain. She wasn't the weakest among the pristine saints in ancient Phoenix Mountain. Moreover, the power of that blow was at least 80% of his strength. It was precisely because of this that the Heavenly Phoenix Saint felt very shocked. His attack with 80% of his strength was actually blocked by a junior with the strength of a quasi-saint. It was unbelievable. Powerful strength brought about stronger confidence. It turned into an astonishingly condensed belief. At this moment, the sword became even more powerful. His inner world was complete, and the mixed Yuan heart force became even more powerful. The mixed Yuan heart force was the fusion of Chunzong's essence, qi, spirit, and mind power. It directly affected Chunzong's perception, multiplying it and making it more useful in the ruins of the world. Chunzong's speed wasn't very fast or slow. He maintained a relatively average speed and didn't care about the directions. After all, although he entered the ruins of the world from the same entrance, he couldn't distinguish the direction after stepping in. Unless he specially left a mark that he could sense in certain places, it was usually used when he encountered a treasure that he couldn't obtain for the time being. Chunzong didn't need to know the direction. He only needed to find the divine demon. As he walked, he comprehended the single-hearted sword art and constantly integrated the mystery of the ancient sword art into it. The ancient sword art was a true supreme sword art. Chunzong didn't fully comprehend it, but he had comprehended most of it. He also constantly integrated its essence into the single-hearted sword art, increasing the power and realm of the single-hearted sword art. Now, Chunzong felt a bottleneck. It was the bottleneck of the single-hearted sword art, the bottleneck of this level of the sword principle realm. It was the bottleneck of the quasi-supreme sword realm and the quasi-supreme sword intent. Once it was broken through, the quasi-supreme sword realm would become the supreme sword realm, and the quasi-supreme sword intent would evolve into the true supreme sword intent. In this way, the single-hearted sword art would also evolve into a supreme sword art. The difference between the quasi-supreme sword art and supreme sword art was very obvious. It was like the difference between a quasi-saint and a true saint. Chunzong constantly integrated the mystery and essence of the ancient sword art into the single-hearted sword art. The later it was, the more difficult it was to integrate it and improve it. Every bit of improvement required a lot of effort from Chunzong. Chunzong was very clear that he had reached a shackle. Although his improvement was slow, he couldn't stop. Otherwise, he would stop moving forward. Only by constantly comprehending it could he continue to accumulate. In the end, he would break through all the obstacles like a flood breaking through a dam. He would break through the bottleneck and shackle and truly break through. Supreme Sword Realm. What an amazing realm. When the single-hearted sword art truly evolved into a supreme sword art, how powerful would it be? Chunzong was full of expectations. In addition to integrating the ancient sword art and increasing the realm and power of the single-hearted sword art, Chunzong was also comprehending the moves of the single-hearted sword art itself. In the beginning, the single-hearted sword art did not have any distinctions between moves. It was just the same sword. Although the trajectories were different and ever-changing, it would never leave the core. It was just the same sword, a tyrannical sword. However, after Chunzong comprehended the mystery of the Shinyang saber technique and integrated it into the single-hearted sword art, differences in the moves of the single-hearted sword art began to appear. After using 100% of his strength to perform the first move, the second move would bear part of the power of the first move onto the mystery, causing the second move's speed and power to increase by several times. It was a disguised increase in strength. Then, the third move would be even more powerful than the second move. However, Chunzong had only mastered 3 moves so far. They were named Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3. Now, Chunzong was going to comprehend the 4th move. If he could comprehend it, the power of Sword 4 would be several times stronger than Sword 3. It was equivalent to his own strength becoming more powerful. The prospects were very good, and the potential was amazing. However, it was extremely difficult to comprehend. After all, the power of the next move would be about 30% stronger than the previous move. A 30% increase was undoubtedly terrifying. It wasn't a killer move, but a pure superposition of the power of the sword art. The power consumption would not increase by much. Just think about it. If the 4th sword, 5th sword, 6th sword, and so on were deduced, how terrifying would their power be? Once they were used, sword after sword, the power of each sword would increase by another 30%. How terrifying would the final power be? It was possible that it would surpass many killer moves. Advancing, comprehending, and deducing. Chunzong not only deduced the single-hearted sword art, but also integrated it into his own footwork. Chunzong also named this footwork as the single-hearted sword steps. The changes between the footwork depended on one's heart, just like the sword art. Although it wasn't as profound as the single-hearted sword art, it was still a good martial art. It belonged to the category of unique skills that many cultivators would fight for if they were placed in the outside world. However, the single-hearted sword steps was also like the sword art. It only had 3 steps. The first step would allow the user to reach the maximum speed. The second step would break the maximum speed by 30%. The third step would be 30% faster than the second step. However, Chunzong also found that the difference between the single-hearted sword steps and the single-hearted sword art was obvious. When performing the single-hearted sword steps, the burden on the body would be greater. If one didn't have a strong enough physique to support it, it would be impossible to withstand such an outburst that surpassed the limit. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days time passed. This time, Chunzong didn't pay attention to how much time had passed. This was because this time, Chunzong planned to continue hunting divine demons and obtain divinities while deducing his own path of cultivation. He would deduce the next realm when he had accumulated enough divinities before making a breakthrough. After an unknown amount of time, Chunzong once again encountered a divine demon. It was a demigod rank divine demon from the demon god lineage. It looked like a rank 3 demigod rank divine demon, with a single horn and a pair of half-meter long bony wings on its back. The majority of rank 3 demigod rank divine demons moved alone. Those that moved in groups were usually rank 1 and rank 2 demigod rank divine demons. There was a huge gap between rank 1 and rank 2 demigod rank divine demons and rank 3 demigod rank divine demons. The moment the rank 3 demigod rank divine demon saw Chinzong, it didn't utter a single word. The half-meter long bony wings on its back suddenly vibrated at a high frequency, propelling its thin body forward at an astonishing speed. It was incomparably fast, flying towards Chinzong like a streak of black light. This streak of black light wasn't perfectly straight. Instead, it formed an arc as if it was following some mysterious trajectory. Its speed actually became faster and faster. The closer it got to Chinzong, the faster the streak of black light became. It was as if it was constantly propelled forward, gaining some kind of boost. Compared to running in a straight line, this streak of black light was probably twice as fast. Chinzong thought to himself, if he hadn't broken through to the complete inner world, he would have had to be more cautious when facing such an opponent. But now, Chinzong's body didn't move. Instead, his eyes focused on the streak of black light that was getting closer and closer. It was like a black aurora, yet it appeared clearly in front of Chinzong's eyes. With the chaotic hard eye, he could see even more clearly. Its trajectory and final landing point were all within Chinzong's grasp. It was a very strange feeling. Shortly after, Chinzong's right hand opened slightly. As a streak of sword light flickered, the heavenly will sword appeared. Without any pretense, he casually swung his sword. With a flash of sword light, it directly cut through the streak of black light. The sword light silently shot towards the streak of black light. It looked as if the streak of black light had taken the initiative to meet the sword light head-on. The divine demon's face was filled with shock. Chapter 2986. In the darkness, a figure suddenly dashed forward, but it didn't go straight. Instead, it went around an arc trajectory, but its speed didn't decrease because of this. Instead, it reached its target faster than if it went straight. Once, twice, thrice, Chinzong kept trying. He also recalled that many years ago, when he hadn't cultivated to the imminent god realm, he used an arc trajectory movement skill. However, due to various reasons, he gave up and didn't delve into it. He didn't expect to see a divine demon expert who had studied the profundity of the arc trajectory to such a profound level in the ruins of world. There was a huge gap in strength, and it was completely one-sided. No matter how profound the opponent's movements were, he wasn't Chinzong's opponent. However, Chinzong didn't kill him directly. Instead, he exerted pressure, causing the opponent to constantly change his movements and use the arc trajectory movement skill to the extreme. As a result, Chinzong continued to pry into its profundity. In the end, Chinzong was able to pry into its profundity. Only then did he kill the rank 3 demigod divine demon with a single strike, obtaining a rank 3 pseudo-divinity in the opponent's divine storage device. Unfortunately, there weren't any profound divine demon secret manuals inside. After killing the demigod divine demon, Chinzong quickly fled far away. Only then did he stop to deduce the arc trajectory movement skill. He tried his best to grasp its profundity and integrate it into his own learning. After trying a few times, he had a vague feeling. It was similar in form, but not in spirit. Chinzong stopped to ponder. He carefully recalled the rank 3 demigod divine demons' every movement. It was extremely detailed. The reason why the other party was able to execute such a profound and mysterious arc trajectory movement technique was not only because of his footwork, but also because of the pair of half-meter-long bone wings on his back. Although the bone wings were not enough to allow him to fly, they could increase his speed, allowing him to move faster and faster. He could also control the changes in direction, making him very agile. However, Chinzong didn't have that pair of bone wings. There was an innate difference between them. The biggest foundation of the profound arc trajectory movement skill was the pair of bone wings. However, After cultivators obtained God-fiend martial arts, they were unable to directly cultivate them. They had to modify them or absorb the essence of the God-fiend martial arts to improve themselves. Chunzong entered a strange state by constantly comprehending, modifying, and experimenting. Soon after, his body paused, and the heavenly will sword appeared. The sword pierced through the air. This sword was not straight, but had a certain curve like an arc of light. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. Chunzong stood where he was, constantly swinging the central heaven sword in his hand, constantly adjusting it, constantly changing the method of exerting force, striving to be more perfect, concise, and perfect, returning to the basics. Every sword strike was not a straight line, but an arc of light, following some kind of trajectory, stabbing out, but its speed was several times faster than if the sword was in a straight line. Gradually, unknowingly, Chunzong, who kept pursuing higher and better, entered a mysterious state. In this state, everything became clear, and all kinds of mysteries emerged. Chunzong stabbed his sword again as if he was enlightened. In an instant, there seemed to be a buzzing sound in the world of the ruins of world. It had a strange, vibrating feeling, as if it was explaining some indescribable mysteries. Traces of supreme aura spread out. It was faintly discernible and disappeared in a flash. Chunzong's eyes suddenly shot out an unparalleled light, as if it had pierced through the dusky sky of the ruins of world. With a swoosh, the muscles on his body trembled slightly, and like a wave, it was transmitted to the arm that held the sword. His tendons and veins trembled slightly, and his muscles also trembled in a strange pattern, transmitting wave after wave of power. It pushed forward layer by layer and became more and more powerful. Finally, the power reached the body of the sword. The body of the middle heaven sword also trembled slightly, and layers of illusory sword light pushed forward like water ripples, penetrating the tip of the sword. At the same time, Chunzong moved with the flow, as if he was in accordance with some kind of mystery in the world. It seemed that he did not need to use any strength, and it was pushed forward naturally. Following the momentum of the world, he stabbed his sword forward. When the sword stabbed out, it looked very ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. However, the sword light was not straight. Instead, it followed some kind of strange trajectory, forming an arc. The arc was not very big, but it felt very relaxed, as if it did not use any strength. However, when the sword streaked across, it left an arc of sword trace in the dusky void of the ruins of world. It was so clear, and it gradually faded after a few breaths, until it finally disappeared. The sword had been withdrawn, but Chunzong's eyes were flickering with countless lights. Every time they flickered, a kind of mystery appeared, alternated, and changed. Countless comprehensions also appeared in Chunzong's mind. In his inner world, there was a faint flash of sword light. It seemed to be condensing into a shape, but it seemed to lack something and could not really condense into a shape. Wisps of spiritual light flashed, and bit by bit, the comprehensions also appeared, slowly accumulating. Chunzong stood motionless in the same place, as if he had turned into a statue. His aura was completely restrained. If one did not see it with their own eyes, even a sage-level expert would not be able to accurately sense it. As time passed, Chunzong still stood there, motionless. The little heavenly sword was held in his hand, slanted to the ground, and there was no aura on the sword. In his comprehension, Chunzong forgot about the passage of time, and also forgot that he was in an extremely dangerous place like the ruins of world. A few powerful auras came from afar. It was a team of 3 demigod-level gods. Each of them had a very strong aura, and they were all demigod-level gods. The 3 gods chatted as they approached Chunzong. Then they saw Chunzong. When they saw Chunzong, they were very surprised because they did not sense Chunzong's aura. If they did not see him with their own eyes, they would not have discovered anything. A human, a living human. What is he doing? The 3 demigod-level gods were very excited. They stared at Chunzong, but did not immediately approach him, fearing that it was a trap. The confrontation between the demigod world and the ancient profound world was basically limited to the ruins of world. After so many years, each side had a good understanding of each other. Although human cultivators were not as strong as gods, after a long period of cultivation, their strength was not weak either. A small number of cultivators were very strong, even stronger than some gods of the same level. No one could predict whether the cultivator they encountered would be one of those geniuses or even monstrous existences. They were not easy to deal with. However, there were 3 demigods here. Do it. After observing for a while and not seeing any danger, the 3 gods immediately took action. In an instant, they attacked. If they did not attack, they would have already attacked. Once they attacked, it was an earth-shattering attack. The power was extremely tyrannical, and it was as if they could shatter space. They did not show any mercy. Kill. In the blink of an eye, the 3 demigod-ranked divine demons unleashed their full strength attacks from 3 different directions. Their attacks were extremely vicious and ferocious. Just as the 3 tyrannical attacks were about to reach him, Chunzong's statue-like body seemed to be pulled by some mysterious force. The heavenly will sword that was pointed diagonally to the ground was raised. Under the guidance of some mysterious force, it suddenly slashed forward. A horizontal slash. The casual sword strike was like a willow branch that was swept across the surface of the water by a cool breeze. It was so relaxed, comfortable, and leisurely, yet it was swift like a flying bird, and it flashed past in an instant. It felt as if an invisible person had grabbed Chunzong's arm and swung the sword. Moreover, Chunzong himself did not use any strength to do so. Yet, there was no strange or obscure feeling to it. It was so natural. A cold light bloomed. The 3 demigod-level gods' full-strength attacks were all dispersed by the thin ray of sword light. They were like smoke blown by a strong wind, dispersing into nothingness in the blink of an eye. The 3 demigod-level gods did not even have time to react before their bodies were slashed by the thin ray of sword light. When the sword light entered their bodies, it disappeared without a trace. The 3 demigod-ranked divine demons seemed to have been cast with a body fixation technique. Their bodies were completely motionless, and their eyes were lifeless. Their vigorous vitality was also rapidly draining away. Although the slash was simple and light, it did not seem to contain the slightest bit of strength. Yet, it contained an extremely terrifying might. 3 kills in 1 slash. It was extremely easy. Sheathing his sword, the ray of sword light that had appeared in his inner world suddenly solidified and emitted an incomparably dazzling radiance. It floated high in the center of his inner world like a deity. An unparalleled sword aura emanated from the ray of sword light and covered the entire inner world. Chunzong's eyes regained their clarity, and a faint ray of sword light could be seen in his eyes. Soon after, Chunzong could not help but laugh. His laughter reverberated in all directions like the surging sound of swords. The sound of battle was extremely shocking. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that this would happen? Originally, he had thought that the demigod-level gods' arcing trajectories were very profound. Out of excitement, he had forced the demigod-level gods to continuously display the trajectories and memorize them. He had planned to comprehend the profoundness of the trajectories and integrate them into his own swordsmanship and movement techniques to increase his battle prowess. However, he did not expect that as he continued to comprehend the trajectories, he would enter a profound state of enlightenment. The trajectories that he had been constantly searching for had also become the trajectories of swordsmanship due to the practice of swordsmanship. Time after time, the trajectories became more and more profound. Unexpectedly, he had broken through the shackles of the quasi-supreme sword realm and made a true breakthrough. He had finally reached the supreme sword realm. What was this? Was it an unintentional success? Although Chunzong continued to comprehend, he was still a hair's breadth away from a true breakthrough. He was on the verge of a breakthrough, but it wasn't that easy to make a breakthrough. Coincidentally, the 3 demigod divine demons had arrived. Their all-out attacks had triggered a change in Chunzong's aura. Chunzong felt as though he had found a way to vent his energy. He took advantage of the situation and brandished his sword, breaking through the shackles of the quasi-supreme sword realm and officially breaking through to the supreme sword realm. Chapter 2987. Supreme Sword Realm. Supreme Sword Essence. Supreme Sword Principle. Supreme, supreme, supreme. The feeling of breaking through to the supreme realm was so wonderful that words couldn't describe it. Within the inner world, the sword light was suspended at the highest point, right in the middle. It was like the sun in the sky, releasing a dazzling light that was extremely resplendent. That sword light contained an incomparably shocking power. This was the manifestation of the supreme sword realm. It was the supreme sword principle. It was the power of the supreme sword principle condensed in Chunzong's inner world. It was the manifestation of the supreme sword principle's origin. After mastering the supreme sword principle and breaking through to the supreme sword realm, Chunzong immediately felt that the influence of the ruins of world on him had weakened a lot. His power of perception also increased by several times in an instant. The range of his perception became wider, and everything within the range of his perception became clearer. This feeling of being able to see the moon after the fog cleared made Chunzong feel very satisfied. It was a kind of intoxicating feeling. Wonderful, it was really wonderful. Although the quasi-supreme sword realm and the supreme sword realm only differed by one word, and although the quasi-supreme sword realm did have some of the mysteries of the supreme sword realm, there was still an essential difference. Supreme, supreme. That was an extreme, a whole new world. However, Chunzong understood that breaking through to the supreme sword realm was not the real limit, but the beginning of a higher level. Supreme was also divided into different levels, just like the Great Way Sword Principle and the Origin Sword Principle. For example, the realm of a sage-level expert was definitely supreme. However, there was a clear gap between the supreme of the Little Saint realm and the supreme of the Great Saint realm. Chunzong's current supreme sword realm was just a preliminary step, which was equivalent to the supreme of the Little Saint realm. It was far from being comparable to the supreme of the Great Saint realm. However, Chunzong's cultivation level was only at the quasi-saint realm. He had not reached the real sage level. Chunzong didn't leave impatiently. He continued to comprehend the various profundities of the supreme sword realm, and he strived to completely grasp its profundities. In this way, when he executed it, he would be able to utilize its might to the limit. He swung his sword. This sword strike was done casually, as if it didn't contain the slightest bit of strength. The sword light was as light as a breeze brushing past a willow tree. It was also like the reflection of the moon on a spring. It was so calm and leisurely, and it was as light and swift as a swallow cutting through water. A faint smile also appeared on Chunzong's face. His smile was relaxed and carefree, as if he was enjoying himself instead of wielding his sword. It was as if he was tasting tea, drinking wine, and enjoying the scenery. However, that beam of sword light was in accordance with a certain trajectory in heaven and earth. It was faintly discernible and directly slashed out. A sword mark was left in the void. It was like an ink stroke across a piece of white paper, leaving a clear mark that did not disappear for a long time. Chunzong swung his sword at a steady pace. Every stroke was either straight or curved. No matter how he attacked, each stroke followed an invisible trajectory. They left streaks in the void of the ruins of world. The streaks were tiny but very clear. They disappeared very slowly, like imprints. However, in the end, they were still unable to resist the power of the ruins of world. They were eventually worn down by the power of the ruins of world. After dozens of breaths, they disappeared as if they had never appeared. Chunzong couldn't help but reveal a touch of joy. Before breaking through to the supreme sword realm, he could also leave streaks in the void of the ruins of world when he attacked with all his might. However, they would only last for a few breaths. Now, even though he didn't attack with all his might, the streaks he left behind could last for dozens of breaths before disappearing. What an amazing improvement! Although he was happy, Chunzong didn't get carried away because of this. Instead, he calmed down and continued to study and comprehend. Supreme Sword Realm. This was a new realm, a higher realm. It was also the realm that Chunzong had just entered. Although he had just broken through, his potential was amazing and could be said to be infinite. He could keep digging. As time passed, Chunzong also kept digging out the potential of the Supreme Sword Realm. The single-hearted sword principle also completely transformed into a Supreme Sword Principle. Chunzong didn't care about the passage of time. He didn't care about anything else. He focused on studying the Supreme Sword Realm and Supreme Sword Principle. This was the Supreme Sword Principle. The power of the Supreme Sword Principle itself was also very powerful and amazing. When the sword came out, it would shock the heavens and the earth. It was extremely terrifying. He continuously attacked with his sword. Every attack was digging out the power of the Supreme Sword Realm. After a period of time, Chunzong finally dug out the potential of the Supreme Sword Realm to the extreme. It was the extreme at the current stage. If he wanted to continue digging, he would need more time and energy. He also needed more high-intensity battles. He calmed down and concentrated. Countless mysteries of swordsmanship emerged in his mind. Now, Chunzong had integrated all the mysteries and essences of swordsmanship that he had learned into the single-hearted sword principle. In other words, if Chunzong wanted to further improve his swordsmanship, it would be insufficient to rely on his own comprehension. He needed more experience. Once again, he drew his sword and performed the single-hearted sword technique. The first attack, the second attack, the third attack. It was Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3 of the single-hearted sword principle. The speed and strength of the next attack were about 10% stronger than the previous one. Under the superposition of speed and strength, the power of each attack was about 30% stronger than the previous one. After using Sword 3, Chunzong's sword paused slightly. However, the sword momentum became more condensed and stronger. Chunzong's eyes shone brightly. He directly shot out a powerful sword essence that flowed through the body of the sword and pierced through the sword tip. He swung the sword. The fourth attack followed. This attack seemed to break some kind of shackles and cut through the void. Sword 4. Sword 4 passed by, leaving marks in the void that didn't disappear for a long time. The sword essence contained in it was extremely shocking and terrifying. Chunzong couldn't help but show a touch of joy. Sword 4 didn't change in essence compared to Sword 3. However, it was about 30% stronger than Sword 3. It sounded simple, but it was actually not. Assuming that Sword 1's power was 100, then Sword 2's power would be 130. Would Sword 3's power be 160? No, Sword 3's power would be 169. As for Sword 4's power, it would increase again and reach 220. The more advanced it was, the more possible it would be to increase the power of each attack by 30%. The power of Sword 4 was more than double that of Sword 1. However, Sword 4 was definitely not the end. It could continue to be improved and create Sword 5, Sword 6, and so on. Chunzong felt that it wouldn't be too difficult for him to create Sword 5 and Sword 6. After all, he had broken through from the quasi-supreme sword realm to the supreme sword realm. He had created Sword 4 and perfected it directly. As for Sword 5, Chunzong already had some ideas. Once he created Sword 5, Sword 6 wouldn't be far away. Thinking of this, Chunzong couldn't help but smile. His current strength had broken through to none. Before the upper sword realm, he had become much stronger. He should be able to fight with a real pristine saint or orthodox god expert. For a moment, Chunzong was looking forward to meeting a divine demon expert at the orthodox god level and having a good fight with him to show off his sword power. Perhaps Chunzong's intuition came true. Before long, Chunzong really met a divine demon expert at the orthodox god level. This was a true god from the heavenly god bloodline. This true god from the heavenly god bloodline was clad in golden red armor. He looked majestic and had a long saber on his back. His body seemed to have fused with the long saber, emitting a supreme saber force. When Chunzong saw him, he also saw Chunzong. That terrifying supreme saber aura erupted in an instant. Vaguely, Chunzong seemed to see a sun rising in the sky, emitting astonishing light and heat. It was a very familiar feeling. Chunzong's eyes lit up slightly. Wasn't this the aura of the divine Yang saber technique? The divine Yang saber technique that he had obtained was only the first 3 moves of the incomplete divine Yang saber technique. Based on the first 3 moves, he had comprehended a more brilliant application of the single-hearted sword technique and created Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3. Now, he had even created Sword 4. However, Chunzong had always wanted to see the complete divine Yang saber technique. Perhaps it would be of great help to him. The martial techniques of divine demons were always more exquisite and closer to the mysteries of the great Tao. The incomplete divine Yang saber technique had brought him many benefits. The curved trajectory movement technique from before had allowed him to break through his limits and advance to the unparalleled sword realm. In addition, the divinity of divine demons was also greatly beneficial to the cultivation of his inner world. Chunzong had once thought that this divine demon was a great opportunity for him. The truth seemed to be so. Now that he saw this divine demon at the principal god level, he did not expect him to cultivate the divine Yang saber technique. Wasn't this fate? The divine demon expert's eyes flickered with golden light as he stared at Chunzong. It was as if he wanted to see through Chunzong. However, he was a little surprised. This was because, in his opinion, Chunzong's aura was one and could not be seen through it all. However, this divine demon expert still made his move. His figure flashed, and he directly drew a golden red streak of light. He was extremely fast. The long saber on his back leaped into his hand, and he suddenly slashed out. This slash was like the rising sun rising into the sky. It emitted a shocking light and heat as it directly attacked. The sun soared through the sky. This was the first move of the divine Yang saber technique, the rising sun slash. Chunzong had seen divine demons at the demigod level perform it before. However, compared to this divine demon expert at the principal god level, there was a huge difference. This slash was performed by this divine demon expert at the principal god level. Its profoundness was indescribable, and it made Chunzong's eyes light up. Subsequently, Chunzong also performed the single-hearted sword techniques, Sword 1. In terms of martial arts realm, both of them were at the supreme level. In terms of cultivation strength, Chunzong's mixed Yuan heart force, which was at the peak of his inner world, was actually very close to the cultivation strength of a pristine saint. Even if there was a gap, it was not that big. Of course, the strength of a divine demon was more tyrannical, so there was still a gap between Chunzong's mixed Yuan heart force. However, such a gap was not absolute. Battle. Fierce battle. This was Chunzong's first real battle with a principal god-level divine demon expert at the peak of his strength. It was a battle to the death. There was an indescribable excitement in Chunzong's heart. That excitement turned into battle intent. Under the stimulation of his battle intent, his sword will become even stronger. Chapter 2988. Amidst the darkness and chaos, the aura and aftershock from the clash of saber and sword were extremely terrifying. Sword chi and saber chi wreaked havoc in all directions, leaving streaks of scars in the void and also breaking open the hard ground, leaving behind streaks of shocking crisscrossing scars. Every scar contained terrifying saber and sword intent. It was extremely shocking, enough to frighten quasi-saints. This divine demon expert cultivated the divine Yang saber technique and had long grasped its saber intent. Under the divine Yang saber intent, it was as if the sun was shining down from the sky, forming a faintly discernible force field that enveloped the surroundings. It also suppressed Chunzong, attempting to crush Chunzong's sword intent. Fortunately, Chunzong's sword intent had also broken through to the supreme sword intent level. This wholehearted sword intent was infinitely profound, which was why it was on par with the opponent's divine Yang saber intent and was not at a disadvantage. Only now did Chunzong understand how lucky he was to be able to kill a divine demon expert at the level of a divine demon expert. Fortunately, that divine demon expert was too severely injured, causing him to be unable to display much of his cultivation strength. His martial Tao divine intent was also greatly affected and unable to suppress Chinzong. Otherwise, Chinzong would not be his opponent. Divine Yang Saber Technique. Wholehearted Sword Technique. Chinzong repeatedly performed the 4 swords of the Wholehearted Sword Technique. The first sword, Sword 1, was the weakest, while Sword 4 was the strongest. However, Chinzong had created these 4 swords himself and could only perform them repeatedly. Generally speaking, performing them repeatedly was the easiest way for people to familiarize themselves with them and then grasp the flaws to target them. However, Chinzong was different. The Wholehearted Sword Technique did not have fixed moves, and the 4 swords could not actually be considered moves. They were incremental. How the 4 swords were performed and how their trajectories changed depended entirely on Chinzong's will. There were many changes, but the only thing that did not change was the core, which was the incremental increase in power. Without moves, there were no traces to be found. Without traces to be found, it would not be easy to target and even more difficult to break through. Although the core did not change, the core was also the hardest to target. How to target it? Directly break it. In other words, as long as you were strong enough, you could ignore everything. If you were not strong enough, you could only use other methods to strengthen yourself. Sword 1 to Sword 4 were repeatedly executed. The different trajectories and variations made it impossible for the righteous god expert to find a weakness. Chinzong was also constantly using the Xinyang saber technique. Bit by bit, Chinzong was able to comprehend the mysteries within it, especially since Chinzong had obtained an incomplete version of the Xinyang saber technique. He had a certain level of research and understanding of the mysteries of the Xinyang saber technique. Chinzong was very familiar with the first 3 moves, but he was not familiar with the 4th move. However, this did not hinder Chinzong's deduction. Deduction during the battle. The 4th slash was like a setting sun. The saber light seemed to have weakened, but the power it contained did not weaken. Instead, it became even more astonishing. The 5th slash was the setting sun. The bright red saber light was like the afterglow of the sunset. It had a strange, poignant beauty, like the color of blood. The power of this slash became more and more restrained. It was so restrained that it could be sensed even though it was weaker. However, its power was actually more tyrannical. Chinzong could feel the terrifying power contained in that slash. If you were to be hit directly, it would definitely be uncomfortable and unbearable. Naturally, Chinzong did not want to be hit. In the fierce battle, Chinzong executed Sword 1 to Sword 4 again and again. Divine Light. As it appeared, Chinzong's sword momentum suddenly increased. As the sword light surged, sword chi surged, and another slash was executed. This slash was different from Sword 4. The speed of the sword increased again, and the sword force contained in it became even more tyrannical. Sword 5. In the fierce battle, Chinzong comprehended it. Divine Light appeared, and he executed Sword 5 naturally. The power of Sword 5 was 30% stronger than Sword 4. However, although Chinzong's single-hearted swordsmanship contained the mysteries of the Xinyang saber technique, it was different. The first slash of the Xinyang saber technique was not strong enough. It was like a starting stance. The second slash was directly strengthened, and the third slash was at its peak. The fourth slash's momentum began to be restrained. It seemed to be weaker, but it was actually because it was restrained. Its power increased. When it came to the fifth slash, the momentum was almost completely restrained. The part that was released was less than 1/10. At first glance, it seemed to be weaker, but in fact it was just that the momentum was restrained, which made the power more condensed and increased. As for Chinzong's single-hearted swordsmanship, the first slash was the weakest in terms of both momentum and power. Now, Sword 5 had become more and more tyrannical. However, Chinzong was inspired by the Xinyang saber technique. Perhaps it could make the momentum of the sword more condensed, or even be restrained like his opponent's fifth slash, Sword of the Setting Sun. In this way, it would be more difficult for others to sense the power of the swordsmanship. The power would also be more condensed and improved. This battle had given Chinzong a lot of inspiration, which kept bursting forth. When the swordsmanship changed, the tyrannical momentum of the sword actually weakened. However, the power of the swordsmanship did not weaken at all. On the contrary, it seemed to have increased. The celestial god Powerhouse's expression became more and more serious. He had already used all of his power and activated the fifth slash of the Shenyang saber technique. However, he still could not take down his opponent. His opponent's swordsmanship was even improving. Even if it was just a little improvement, it was still very frightening. This person must be a demon-level genius of the human clan. If such a genius were to grow up, his future would be limitless. Perhaps he would bring some resistance to the ancient mystic world in the future. Although it was said that in the face of the ancient mystic world, the strength of a few people was not enough to resist, some of the strongest people of the human clan still had very strong strength and methods. They were enough to cause considerable damage to the ancient mystic world. Of course, the human before him did not have such strength now. However, his talent was amazing. There was some possibility in the future. Kill him here. With that thought, the celestial god Powerhouse's expression became resolute. The momentum of the Shenyang saber technique also gathered in an instant and condensed into one. He raised the saber high, and a ray of light suddenly surged out. As the terrifying momentum of the saber surged, the Shenyang saber will also shot up into the sky, directly forming a golden-red true sun in the sky. It pressed down across the sky, and its terrifying power was vast and mighty. Vaguely, the invisible force field seemed to be strengthened to the extreme, enveloping the entire area. Shenzong's expression changed slightly. He felt that the power of the saber was much stronger than before. His heart became even more solemn. Slash! In an instant, the celestial god Powerhouse slashed out with all of his strength, bringing with it the most powerful power. The mighty golden red divine sun also exploded, pressing down across the sky. Everywhere it passed, everything was shattered into nothingness. The profound meaning of the Shenyang saber technique, Shenyang Fall. It was the most tyrannical saber strike, a sure kill saber strike, an extremely terrifying saber strike. If it was in the outside world, the power that erupted from the saber could shatter the void hundreds of meters or even thousands of meters, directly turning it into nothingness. It was many times more powerful than the attack of the ancient Phoenix Mountains Heavenly Phoenix Saint at 80% power. This saber move immediately made Chunzong feel extremely threatened. The invisible force field pressed down, enveloping Chunzong as if it wanted to suppress Chunzong. Chunzong felt as if his hands and feet were tied. The terrifying power even pressed down on him, making Chunzong feel as if he was directly thrown into an oven and incessantly burned. It was extremely uncomfortable. The world seemed to be about to collapse because of this. Chunzong then exploded, the mixed Yuan heart force surging like a volcano. Sword 1, Sword 2, Sword 3, Sword 4, Sword 5. In an instant, Chunzong swung his sword 5 times in a row. Because the speed was so fast, it looked as if he had swung his sword 5 times in an instant. The trajectories of the 5 sword lights were all different, and the power of the last sword was even more powerful. However, Chunzong's purpose was not to use this to fight against his opponent. The power was obviously not enough. He did this in order to display the most powerful sword move. Tai Hao. After Sword 5, Chunzong's mixed Yuan heart force erupted in an instant, surging and surging like a raging torrent, pouring into the long sword. A true sun hung in the air, making Chunzong look as if he was immersed in the true sun, burning endlessly. Astonishing light and scorching heat also continued to spread. The power of the Tai Hao sword, which was performed with the supreme sword principle, had reached an astonishing height. It was extremely powerful. In an instant, 2 true suns of different colors streaked across the sky, colliding with each other. As they approached each other, the surrounding void began to distort, as if it could not withstand the terrifying pressure. As they got closer, the terrifying aura became more shocking, and the distortion became more intense. The moment the 2 true suns of different colors collided, they both paused, as if they were frozen. In the next moment, a terrifying sound swept across the world, and an astonishing power also exploded. It was like the eruption of an ancient volcano, extremely powerful and ferocious. Even if the environment of the ruins of world was unique, that place still collapsed in an instant, and countless cracks appeared. Streaks of dense darkness emitted an extremely terrifying aura that could destroy everything. After displaying the Tai Hao sword, Chunzong had already let his inner world absorb 5 rank 3 false divinities, rapidly replenishing the mixed Yuan heart force that he had consumed. The true suns collapsed, and everything was destroyed. The terrifying power spread in all directions. Chunzong's figure flickered again and again. Under the supersensitivity of the One Heart Sutra, he followed the weak spot of the aftermath of the explosion and rapidly charged towards the divine demon expert. The divine demon expert was also very fierce. He also endured the impact of the explosion and charged towards Chunzong. His long saber pierced through the air, and the divine sun saber technique was displayed once again. The collision of the ultimate moves ended in a tie, and it became a battle of sword and saber techniques. In an instant, Chunzong's inspiration surged, and he slashed out with his sword again. The power of this sword was even more tyrannical. The sixth sword. After a fierce battle, Chunzong actually created the fifth sword and the sixth sword. The sixth sword's power was even more powerful and terrifying. This sword even broke the opponent's saber light and directly hit the divine demon expert's tyrannical divine demon body. Chunzong had already experienced the frightening strength of the divine demon expert's divine demon body. However, this time, Chunzong's sword broke through the divine demon expert's divine demon body. This was because Chunzong's strength was even stronger. With a sword in hand, Chunzong displayed the one-heart sword technique to the extreme. He changed his sword according to his will and gradually gained the upper hand. Chapter 2989. A saint-level expert had already undergone a metamorphosis. His life essence had been raised to an amazing level, transcending the mortal world and becoming a divine being. The strength of a divine being was not reflected in its strength. After all, if a cultivator did not cultivate his body, his divine being would not have the element of cultivating his body. Of course, even without cultivating his body, a saint-level divine being was still very strong. It was not weaker than a saint-level expert who cultivated his body. A saint-level divine being who cultivated his body would be even stronger. However, the greatest effect of the holy body was its ability to adapt to the environment. In a harsh environment, it could adapt better. It also had a greater resistance to all kinds of forces in the world, such as the erosion of toxins. In addition, its self-healing ability was also developed to the extreme. Some injuries could be healed in a very short period of time. It was precisely because of this that it was so difficult to kill a Saint Stage expert. Even if an eminent Saint Stage expert wanted to kill a pristine Saint Stage expert, if he was not prepared to prevent the pristine Saint Stage expert from escaping, he could only injure the pristine Saint Stage expert. Of course, if the eminent Saint Stage expert pursued the pristine Saint Stage expert relentlessly, it was not impossible to kill the pristine Saint Stage expert. However, it was more difficult to kill a little saint expert of the same level. For example, it was very difficult to kill a little saint expert of the same level. It was the same for both saint-level experts and divine demons. Moreover, the divine demon body of the same level was more powerful than a divine being. It was very terrifying. Not only was its strength higher, but its self-healing ability was also more amazing. It was this that led to the strength of divine demons of the same level being more terrifying and more difficult to deal with. Chunzong also deeply understood this point. At the same time, he also understood how lucky he was to be able to kill a divine demon of the same level when he was a saint-level expert. It was really a great advantage. At that time, the saint-level expert of the human clan was extremely ferocious. He fought with his life, and with the intention of perishing together, he used all his strength to severely injure the divine demon expert with 3 palms. Moreover, He left a terrible force in the divine demon expert's body, wantonly destroying and difficult to expel. In addition, due to the environmental impact of the ruins of the world, the divine demon expert was more severely injured. In addition, Chunzong fought with all his might to finally kill him. However, even though Chunzong had gained the upper hand and suppressed the righteous god with the wholehearted sword technique, he had struck the righteous god several times and injured him. However, he was still unable to kill him. Not only was he not killed, but the injuries caused by those sword strikes were also rapidly healing. He was able to gain the upper hand because his opponent's Shenyang saber technique had been seen through by Chunzong. However, Chunzong's single-hearted sword technique had not been seen through by his opponent. The profoundness of the single-heart sword technique might not be endless, but there was still a lot of it. After all, it had fused the profoundness of many sword techniques into it. Every single sword technique would be very powerful when cultivated to the extreme, but after the essence was absorbed and fused into one, it would become even more shocking. Sword 1 to Sword 6 were continuously performed. Chunzong also made the sword momentum of each sword move more condensed and harder to sense. At the same time, the power contained in it became stronger and stronger. He started to improve from Sword 1. Now, the power of each sword move was about 30% stronger than before. In other words, the power of Sword 1 now was equivalent to Sword 2 from before, and Sword 2's power was equivalent to Sword 3 from before. Every sword move had an obvious improvement. The power of Sword 6 was equivalent to Sword 7 that had not been derived yet. From then on, Chunzong discovered another way to strengthen the single-heart sword technique. Not only could he derive the subsequent sword moves, but he could also strengthen each sword move individually. In other words, as long as he increased the power of Sword 1, the power of the subsequent sword moves would naturally increase. It had to be said that this divine demon was indeed an opportunity for him. It allowed him to cultivate his inner world to the perfect realm. It also allowed him to greatly improve his sword techniques and comprehended the supreme realm of sword principle. Chunzongdo really wanted to give the gods and devils a banner to express his gratitude. But now it was better to kill this divine demon first, because Chunzong had obtained the incomplete version of the divine Yang saber technique. In addition to the intense battle that followed, he had seen through the profoundness of the divine Yang saber technique. Thus, he was able to target his opponent's attacks. He used the single-hearted sword technique to its fullest potential, causing his opponent to be suppressed in all aspects. He felt a sense of inferiority, which made him even more uncomfortable. Suppressed, disadvantaged. The divine demon expert's expression was extremely ugly. He had never thought that he would be suppressed. His opponent's sword techniques were so profound that he could not see through them. He could not see through them, and his opponent seemed to have seen through the mysteries of his divine Yang saber technique. He was in an increasingly difficult situation. Moreover, this disadvantageous situation would only get worse as time went on. Explode. The power of the divine demon was vast and mighty. A true sun appeared in the sky and merged into the divine demon's body. In an instant, the divine demon's body was dyed with a layer of golden red light, causing his strength to increase exponentially. Slash! Chunzong's hair stood on end. Even though he knew the flaws of his opponent's divine Yang saber technique, the power of this slash was extremely powerful and terrifying. It was more than twice as powerful as before. Divine Demon Secret Technique. Divine demons naturally had some secret techniques that could be used to increase their strength. However, they were usually used as trump cards and would not be used easily. After all, the use of secret techniques was not without a price. It was usually burdensome. Chunzong's expression was cold and solemn. He was lacking in this aspect. He did not have any secret techniques that could increase his strength. After all, those secret techniques in the past were no longer suitable for him because he had walked on his own path of cultivation. In addition, due to time constraints, he had not yet figured out a secret technique that was suitable for him. Facing this slash, Chunzong knew that he could not block it. Moreover, this slash was extremely fast. He wanted to unleash the Tai sword technique, but it was too late. Retreat. In an instant, Chen Zong took a step back. His speed was extremely fast. When he took a second step, his speed increased again. He was using the wholehearted sword steps. In an instant, Chen Zong took 4 steps. When he took the 4th step, his speed reached an astonishing level. He was extremely fast. He dodged like a flash of light. However, the divine demon's second slash was also coming. It was even more powerful. Chen Zong continued to move left and right. His expression became increasingly calm. While dodging, he would also attack with his sword. He would hit the weak points of the slash light and either deflect or break it. For a moment, Chen Zong was actually suppressed. However, his opponent's outburst could not last long. He only needed to get through this period of time. When that time came, it would be time to counterattack. In addition, even if he was at a disadvantage, Chen Zong was still constantly studying and exploring his own potential. Suddenly, the divine demon who had slashed out more than a dozen powerful slashes immediately retreated. His speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a flash of light and fled into the distance. He was extremely fast. He escaped. The ferocious divine demon chose to escape. This was slightly out of Chen Zong's expectations. However, it was to be expected. There is nothing wrong with divine demons being ferocious. However, when faced with a difficult situation, they would also choose to retreat. They would only fight with their lives on the line if they had no other choice. However, it was difficult to kill this human now. On the contrary, he was being restrained in every way. This made his heart palpitate. If he waited for the power of the secret technique to pass, his strength would decrease significantly. Then, he would be in danger. The divine demon's body was strong. It was difficult to kill him, but it did not mean that he could not be killed. The reason why it was difficult to kill him was not only because of his strong body, but also because he could escape. Chase. Chen Zong did not hesitate. He immediately chased after him. When he took a step forward, his speed increased again. When he took a 3rd step, his speed increased again. When he took a 4th step, his speed increased again. Soon after, Chen Zong took a 5th step. When he took this step, Chen Zong immediately felt a faint tension in his legs. It was as if he was about to reach his limit. This 5th step was already the upper limit of his body's endurance. If there was a 6th step, he would not dare to take it. Otherwise, he would exceed his limit and cause damage to his body. However, with these 5 steps, Chen Zong's speed suddenly reached a terrifying level. He shot out like a flash of light. During this time, Chen Zong was even more inspired. He used the trajectory arc technique, causing his speed to increase again. He was getting closer and closer to the divine demon expert. Chase. Chen Zong had already set his eyes on the divine demon's divinity. He would definitely not let it go. One chased while the other fled. Chen Zong's mixed Yuan heart force recovered at an amazing speed. Coupled with the support of the false divinity, it was even more amazing. Chen Zong was in peak condition. Finally, the divine demon's secret technique was up. It could not be maintained any longer. Its speed suddenly decreased. Soon, Chen Zong caught up with it. It was impossible to escape. Chen Zong's sword had been accumulating power for a long time. It soared through the air and attacked. What he used was the single-hearted sword technique, which used the strong to attack the weak. This fierce battle had brought great benefits to Chen Zong. Countless inspiration for the way of the sword emerged like a geyser. Chen Zong had new insights at every moment. At that very moment, Chen Zong transformed the sword into Sword 1 as soon as it was unleashed. The power of Sword 1, which used the strong to attack the weak, doubled. Soon after, the second sword was used. It was Sword 2. The power of Sword 2 was increased by 30%. It was even more terrifying. Then, Chen Zong used Sword 3. The power of this sword was 30% stronger than that of Sword 2. The speed of the sword was also faster. However, after these 3 sword strikes, Chen Zong immediately felt that his right arm was extremely tense. His tendons were stretched taut, and his muscles were also stretched to their limits. Chen Zong did not use Sword 4. This was because he had a hunch that if he used Sword 4 in this state, his right arm would be damaged and his muscles would be torn apart. However, the power of Sword 3 had already surpassed that of Sword 6, which did not use the strong to attack the weak. He could not block it. The divine demon expert was directly hit. The sword chi invaded his body and wreaked havoc. He was directly injured. Under Chunzong's full power, the sword light was endless. He alternated between using the weak to defeat the strong and using the strong to attack the weak. He controlled the rhythm of his attacks. On the other hand, the divine demon expert was weakened by the secret technique. He was constantly hit by the sword and was in a sorry state. Even though his divine demon body was strong and his self-healing ability was amazing, he was still affected by the environment of the ruins of world. His self-healing speed could not keep up with the speed of his injuries. His injuries became more serious. Chapter 2990. The World Ruins. Chunzong's eyes flickered with radiance before it turned into regret, and he sighed. What a pity. Why was it a pity? This was because even after the quintessential God-level divinity and many quintessential divinities were absorbed by the inner world, it did not allow the inner world to break through again. There were no signs of a breakthrough at all, and the inner world did not even expand. What did this mean? It meant that Chunzong's inner world had reached its limit. Merely absorbing divinity was not enough to allow his inner world to break through to a higher level. It's time to leave the world ruins. Chunzong muttered to himself. He had stayed in the world ruins for at least a few years. It was undoubtedly a very long time for other cultivators. After all, the environment of the world ruins was harsh. Quasi-saint cultivators did not dare to stay for too long. Otherwise, they would not be able to withstand the erosion. Even pristine saint experts could not stay for too long. They could not stay for more than a few years. Otherwise, the impact would be too great. The chaotic energy of the world ruins would constantly erode. It was fine for a short period of time. Even if it was eroded, it could be dispelled. However, after a long period of time, it would inevitably become deep-rooted. It would be even harder to dispel, and it would damage one's foundation. Therefore, quasi-saint experts would not stay in the world ruins for more than 3 months. At most, it would be a month. Pristine saint experts would not stay for more than a year. As for divine demon experts, although they were stronger and more effective in resisting the erosion of the world ruins, they would not stay for more than a year. Only great saint experts could stay in the world ruins for a few years, like Chunzong. This was because Chunzong's cultivation path was unique. It was different from saint experts. He formed his own inner world and was not affected by the chaotic energy of the world ruins. Over the past few years, Chunzong had killed 2 principal gods and dozens of demigod gods. Naturally, all of their divinity had been absorbed and refined by Chunzong's inner world. Although his inner world hadn't expanded, it was extremely condensed and had reached an astonishing height. However, it was already the limit, and it had reached the point where it could no longer be improved. At the very least, the divinity of a righteous god could no longer enhance the inner world. Chunzong estimated that it would only be possible if the divinity of a spiritual god was used, but it was only a possibility. After all, the cultivation of the inner world had really reached the limit, and any further improvement would mean a breakthrough to the next level. It was a pity that Chunzong didn't understand much even after years of continuous meditation. He only had some fragments of inspiration. This was a brand new path of cultivation. There was no predecessor's experience to refer to. He had to rely entirely on his own efforts. He was like a pioneer. As such, it wasn't impossible for him to stop for tens, hundreds, or even thousands of years before he found the next level. It was only a few years now, so it wasn't a big deal. However, Chunzong was actually a little anxious. If it was during normal times, it would be fine as he could take it slowly. However, now, Chunzong urgently needed more power, enough to contend with the ancient Phoenix Mountain. Otherwise, how could he take Yunyin away? The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage wouldn't agree, and the strongest existence of the ancient Phoenix Mountain wasn't the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. At this stage, his strength was very strong. Although his cultivation base was still equivalent to the quasi-saint stage and had not reached the true saint stage, his combat strength was so powerful that it was comparable to the pristine saint stage. It was not impossible for him to kill some weaker pristine saint stage powerhouses. However, it wasn't enough to face a powerful small saint. As for a big saint, he was no match for a small saint at all. He would be crushed directly. Another point was that the environment of the ruins of world was inseparable from the fact that he was able to kill two righteous gods. Otherwise, if it was a place without restrictions, even if he could win, it would be difficult to kill his opponents. From this point, the influence of the environment of the ruins of world was too great. Since divinity couldn't help him improve anymore, there was no need for him to continue staying here. It was time to leave. In the past few years, other than improving his inner world to the extreme, Chunzong had experienced many battles and even life-and-death battles. He had also seen many unique skills of the gods and demons. The help they brought to him was obvious. His single-hearted sword technique was getting stronger, and so was his single-hearted sword steps. His overall strength was at least 50% stronger than when he had just broken through to the supreme sword realm and killed the righteous gods and demons. At this level, it was very difficult to improve one's strength. Even if it was a 10% increase, it was still a shocking increase. 50% was undoubtedly terrifying. When Chunzong stepped out of the ruins of world, it was still the 9 experts who were guarding the stronghold. When they saw Chunzong, their first reaction was disbelief. They immediately did all kinds of checks to prevent Chunzong from being possessed by the gods and demons and sneaking into the supreme mystery realm. Fortunately, they were suppressed in time. Otherwise, it would have been a huge problem. After a detailed check, they finally confirmed that Chunzong was still Chunzong. His body wasn't possessed by the gods and demons. However, that wasn't all. The true saint appeared and took Chunzong away for further checks. After all, Chunzong had stayed in there for too long. It was a few years. They had to be careful. Of course, the true saint also explained the reason to Chunzong. The reason why they were so cautious was because something like this had happened before. It caused chaos in the supreme mystery realm and almost affected the ancient mysterious world. Chunzong was also very cooperative. He also revealed a little about his cultivation method. For sage-level experts, their cultivation path was already fixed. If they wanted to change it, it was equivalent to starting from scratch. If they wanted to cultivate to the sage level again, it would take a lot of time and effort. The loss outweighed the gain. Therefore, even if they knew all about Chunzong's cultivation method, it was useless. The true saint was very good to Chunzong. Therefore, although Chunzong didn't reveal everything, he still described it briefly to let the true saint know why he could stay in the ruins of world for such a long time. Gasp! After the true saint heard about it, his first reaction was to gasp. It was really unusual to have such a cultivation method. It was a pity that it couldn't be popularized. After a series of detailed checks, he finally confirmed that Chunzong wasn't possessed by gods and demons. He also didn't leave any tricks behind. Therefore, he didn't restrict Chunzong's freedom anymore. Chunzong also took this opportunity to consult the true Void Great Sage. After all, he was an expert in the Great Sage realm and had gone far in the path of cultivation. He was a senior expert. Although his path of cultivation was different from Chunzong's, he could still provide some advice to a certain extent. Your cultivation method is your own. I don't know much about it. Therefore, I can't give you any advice. The true saint pondered and said slowly, but since you've cultivated the inner world, is the next step to evolve into an inner universe. Hearing this, Chunzong's eyes could not help but light up. In fact, this idea had flashed through his mind, but there were too many fragments of inspiration, so Chunzong did not grasp it. Now that the true Void Great Sage mentioned it, he had a feeling of sudden enlightenment. Inner world, inner universe. Although there was still no clear path, at least there was a direction to move forward. In addition, you mainly cultivate the way of the sword. You can go to the ancient realm of swords. The true saint continued. The way of the sword is very prosperous there. It should be able to give you some inspiration and help you improve on the way of the sword. Thank you. Senior. Chunzong immediately saluted with his sword. Wait a moment. If you're going to the ancient domain of 10,000 swords, you can go to the Starry Sword Palace and bring my name card, the True Space Grand Sage said after a moment of silence. I'm old friends with the Starry Sword Palace. If you bring my name card, it might give you a chance. With that, the true saint took out a silver jade butterfly the size of half a palm. It was covered with fine lines and looked as if it was about to shatter. In fact, it was not. Instead, it contained a mysterious aura. It was the aura of the true saint's true void-shattering way. This was the name card. It was a person's identification. He wouldn't give it to others easily. Giving it was a kind of recognition. It meant that he thought highly of the person. After keeping the name card, Chunzong bade farewell to the true saint and left great mystery. As for the ancient phoenix goddess, Chunzong had asked the true saint about her. She was still in seclusion and hadn't appeared. Then he would put it aside for now and continue to cultivate and improve his strength. If he was strong enough, so strong that no one could stop him, he wouldn't have to worry about anything. The ancient realm of swords, the place where the way of the sword thrives. There were hundreds of domains in the ancient mystic world. Most of them were small domains. A few were large domains. As for the ancient realm, there were only 4 of them. The ancient realm of swords was opposite the sealed heaven ancient realm. It wasn't close, but with Chunzong's speed, it wouldn't be difficult for him to go from the sealed heaven ancient realm to the ancient realm of swords. It would just take some time. There were many ways of cultivation in the ancient mystic world. The way of the sword had always been one of the ways of cultivation. There were many people who practiced the way of the sword in hundreds of domains. But when it came to the place where the way of the sword thrived, it was none other than the ancient realm of swords. The ancient realm of swords was known to gather the power of 10,000 swords. It was the place where countless ways of the sword converged and competed. Over countless years, countless powerful sword cultivators had been born. There were also many sword cultivators who came from far away just to admire the way of the sword and appreciate the power of 10,000 swords. Their arrival also made the way of the sword in the ancient realm of swords richer and more prosperous. In the end, it flourished and never declined. The ancient realm of swords was now synonymous with the holy land of the way of the sword. It was the place where countless sword cultivators in the ancient mystic world yearned to go. Any sword cultivator who was successful in the way of the sword would try their best to overcome all the difficulties when they found out about the ancient realm of swords. They would cross over mountains and rivers to come here because their way of the sword could improve and reach a higher level in the ancient realm of swords. Countless sword cultivators came here to gain something from the ancient realm of swords. At the same time, they also spread their own understanding of the way of the sword to the land of the ancient realm of swords. It made the atmosphere of the way of the sword even richer and formed a virtuous cycle. With the sincerity of a sword cultivator, Chunzong set out from the sealed heaven ancient realm. He crossed mountains and forests. With Chunzong's current strength, which was comparable to a saint-grade expert of the pristine saint realm, there weren't many people who could threaten him in this world. Those who could threaten him wouldn't appear easily. Chapter 2991. The Myriad Sword Ancient Domain was one of the 4 great ancient domains in the ancient profound world. Within the 4 great ancient domains, there were at least 3 saint lands. For example, the sealed heaven ancient domain had 3 great saint lands, while the 4 great saint lands had 4 great saint lands. As for the other great domains, some had 1 saint land while some had 2. However, most of the great domains only had 1 saint land. In all fairness, the sealed heaven ancient domain was ranked the lowest among the 4 great ancient domains. After all, there were only 3 great saint lands. The 4 great saint lands and the 4 great saint lands were stronger than the sealed heaven ancient domain. The Myriad Sword ancient domain also had the 4 great saint lands, but their overall strength was stronger than the 4 great saint lands. They were ranked second among the 4 great ancient domains. As for the number 1 mysterious heavens ancient domain, it had the 5 great saint lands. They were very powerful and were also the largest and oldest domain in the ancient profound world. The Star Sword Palace was one of the 4 great saint lands in the Myriad Sword ancient domain. It was also the place where Chunzong could obtain an opportunity according to the Void Great Saint. As for what kind of opportunity it was not clear, as Chunzong had to go there personally. Other than that, there was also the Myriad Sword Mountain, the Solitary Sword Villa, and the No Return Sword Valley. The Myriad Sword Mountain was the number 1 saint land in the Myriad Sword ancient domain. In the beginning, the Myriad Sword ancient domain was only the Myriad Sword Mountain. However, as the Myriad Sword ancient domain continued to develop, countless sword cultivators came on a pilgrimage to the Myriad Sword ancient domain, causing the sword principle to flourish. As different sword principles clashed, more saint-level experts were born. Some of these saint-level powerhouses joined the Myriad Swords Mountain, while others left. Some settled down in the Myriad Swords ancient domain and established their own forces, which were called Holy Lands. There were also some Holy Lands that were formerly powerful forces and became Holy Lands because of the birth of a supreme saint. That's right. The standard to determine whether a saint land was a great saint realm expert or not. If it was only a pristine saint realm expert, it would not be called a saint land. At most, it would be a heaven-grade force. The Star Sword Palace, the Solitary Sword Villa, and the No Return Sword Valley were born because of this. Since then, the 4 sword principal Holy Lands had jointly controlled the 10,000 sword ancient realm. They had divided the resources in the 10,000 sword ancient realm and continued to develop and grow. As a result, it was difficult for the other forces to produce a great saint realm expert. Even the pristine saint realm had become more difficult. However, in the world of natural selection, cultivation meant competing with the heavens and the earth, competing with others. In a limited amount of time, resources were also limited. If one could not obtain more resources in a limited amount of time, how could one surpass others? How could he pursue the Great Tao? The battle for the Great Tao had always been the cruelest. It didn't allow for the slightest bit of pity. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to giving up. The moment Chunzong stepped into the 10,000 sword ancient realm, he immediately felt that the aura of the sword principle was very strong. It was as if the air was filled with sword principle factors. From afar, he seemed to be able to see subtle flashes of brilliance, as if a sword cultivator was holding a sword and cutting across the sky. There was a kind of extraordinary mystery to it. With Chunzong's current sword principle realm, although the flashes of brilliance contained mystery, it was not enough to look at. However, for a sword cultivator whose sword principle realm was at the level of Great Tao sword principle, it was a rare mystery that was enough to be comprehended. However, when it came to the origin sword principle realm, the mystery contained in the sword light became ordinary. Even so, it was still very good. After all, it was an ancient realm. As long as one entered the 10,000 sword ancient realm, they would be able to see it. At least, as far as Chunzong knew, there was no such amazing public place in the outer universe. There were some secret places of powerful sects that flourished in sword principle, but only people from the sects could enter and observe. One was open to the public, and as long as one stepped into the realm, they would be able to see it. The other was open to the people of the sects, and it was a secret place that only a few people could see. The difference was huge. Chunzong could not help but smile. He was looking forward to the 10,000 sword ancient realm even more. During those years in the ruins of world, Chunzong had been constantly fighting and comprehending. He had also been constantly developing the potential of his supreme sword principle. However, it was still not enough. Chunzong felt that there was still a lot of potential that could be developed. However, it seemed that he had reached a bottleneck. If he wanted to further develop the potential, he would need more experience. It was because of this that Chunzong came to the 10,000 sword ancient realm, which was known as the place where sword principle flourished. He hoped to find inspiration to further develop his own potential in sword principle. Supreme Sword will spread out and came in contact with the rich sword principle aura of the 10,000 sword ancient realm, as if it was about to merge with it. In an instant, the heavens and earth were shaken. Countless sword cries sounded as if they came from the ancient times. Rays of sword light appeared out of nowhere and appeared in the sky, covering tens of thousands of miles. As soon as such a strange phenomenon appeared, it immediately attracted the attention of many people. After all, it covered tens of thousands of miles, which was an amazing range. Countless sword lights appeared in the sky, and sword cries were constantly heard. Even people who were tens of thousands of miles away could hear and see it clearly. Shock. All of them were extremely shocked and excited, and all of them flashed towards the location of the phenomenon of the sword Tao. Chunzong was slightly stunned when he caused the phenomenon of the sword Tao, and then he withdrew his aura of the sword Tao. The sword lights dispersed successively, and the sword howls that reverberated through the heavens and the earth fell silent. In the next moment, Chunzong turned into an illusory sword light and quickly flew away. Not long after, an illusory figure appeared out of thin air. It looked like a middle-aged man. When it opened and closed its eyes, it shot out an unparalleled radiance. It was like a flash of lightning that swept across the sky and penetrated everything. Immediately, it looked in the direction that Chunzong had left, as if it was deep in thought. In the next moment, the illusory figure also disappeared, as if it had never appeared. After a while, rays of sword light flew over from afar. They were the powerful sword cultivators who were chasing after the strange phenomenon. It was a pity that the strange phenomenon had disappeared, and so had the person who had caused it. The Sword of Radiance sect was one of the sword principal forces in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm. The atmosphere of the sword principle in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm was very prosperous. Practicing here was more efficient and more refined than in other realms. As a result, the other cultivation principles in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm gradually declined. After all, it was inevitable that there would be conflicts and even life and death battles between cultivators. In a conflict, it was usually those cultivators of the Sword Tao that had the upper hand, whereas those who didn't cultivate the Sword Tao were mostly at a disadvantage. As time passed, it became more and more obvious, and it was even to the extent that some cultivators who didn't cultivate the Sword Tao were annihilated by cultivators of the Sword Tao. Gap. In this dense atmosphere of the sword principle, the other Tao cultivators did not have much of an advantage. However, the sword principle cultivators had an advantage. As a result, the non-sword principle cultivators had no choice but to change to the sword principle. After a period of change, they also became stronger. There were also some non-sword principle cultivators who had to move out of the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm and develop in other realms. Now, the various forces in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm, regardless of their size, mainly focused on the sword principle. There might be some who practiced martial arts, but it was only supplementary. The Sword of Radiance sect was an Earth-level force in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm. It was one of the top Earth-level forces. At this moment, in the main hall of the Sword of Radiance sect, the sect leader and a group of elders were having a discussion. The atmosphere was a little tense. The time limit for the offerings to the Exalted Sect is almost up. Sect leader, what should we prepare this time? An elder asked in a low voice. The sect leader did not answer directly. Instead, he was thinking. There were many sword principal forces in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm. It seemed complicated, but it was not. In fact, it was orderly. The lower sects offered offerings to the Exalted Sect, and the Exalted Sect offered offerings to the Holy Land. The Sword of Radiance sect was an Earth-level force. The Exalted Sect they offered offerings to was a Heaven-level force. In the ancient Phoenix domain, there were not many Heaven-level forces. There were only 3 of them. However, in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Realm, there were close to 20 Heaven-level forces. Every 10 years, the lower sects had to offer offerings to the Exalted Sect. This was the rule. Every time the time for offering offerings came, the lower sects would have a headache. What should they offer this time? They had to rack their brains for an answer. At this moment, a figure silently entered the main hall. However, it did not attract the attention of the crowd. On the contrary, the people of the Sword of Radiance sect were all racking their brains. I'm sword cultivator Chenzong. I am here to take a look at your sword technique. Chenzong opened his mouth. His voice was calm and light. It was like a gentle breeze that blew past everyone's ears. It instantly woke them up. It was as if they were awakened, but it was not. It was as if they were awakened. They naturally looked over and were immediately shocked. Who are you? One of the elders' expression changed drastically. A powerful aura erupted. The heavenly sword force also surged forward in an instant, as if it was about to suppress Chenzong. However, this seemingly tyrannical sword force was like a gentle breeze to Chenzong, and it did not affect him in the slightest. This scene caused everyone to be even more shocked. But how did you get here? The sect leader of the Sword of Radiance sect stood up and bowed. I walked in. Chenzong smiled slightly. Everyone, I am a sword cultivator. I want to understand the supreme sword principle and observe the sword principle of the world. The Sword of Radiance sect is my first stop. As he spoke, Chenzong's words were laced with a hint of coercion. The coercion of the supreme sword principle, even if it was just a hint, was not comparable to the heavenly sword principle. It was enough to intimidate them. In an instant, everyone was shocked. They felt as if the person in front of them had turned into a giant sword that stood on the ground and pointed straight at the sky. The power of the sword was endless and extremely terrifying. They could not provoke him. This person was a sword principle expert. Although they did not know how strong he was definitely not someone they could deal with. They could not provoke him. In an instant, countless thoughts flashed through the sect leader's mind. His expression changed unpredictably. Some sword techniques were fine, but some sword techniques were the foundation of the sect. If they were leaked, it would not be a good thing for the sect. However, although this person's words seemed gentle, they contained an unquestionable dominance. It is the sect's honor that you are willing to observe our sword technique. The sect master's expression changed back and forth, and after 100 thoughts flashed through his mind, he revealed a smile and respectfully said, "Thank you." Chapter 2992. The Sword of Radiance sect was only an Earth-level force. Although it was one of the stronger sects among the many Earth-level forces, the most powerful person was only in the Heaven-level final realm. For Chenzong, he did not even need to draw his sword. A breath of sword aura was enough to kill them all. This was the difference in nature. It was a completely one-sided difference. However, the difference in strength did not mean that the Sword of Radiance sect did not have any redeeming qualities. At least in Chenzong's opinion, every swordsmanship or even sword technique had its own subtleties. Even the most basic swordsmanship had its own merits. Chenzong's plan was very simple. He wanted to read all the swordsmanship and sword techniques in the world and understand their essence. Then he would extract it and integrate it into his own single-hearted sword technique. This would further improve the realm and power of the single-hearted sword technique. From a very long time ago, Chenzong had been walking on this path. The return of 10,000 swords was like the return of 100 rivers to the sea. Now, Chenzong was still doing the same. His original intention had not changed. Gathering all the swordsmanship and swordsmanship in the world, only then would it be supreme. In the library of the Sword of Radiance sect, Chenzong was flipping through the books collected by the Sword of Radiance sect. There were introductions to the history of the Sword of Radiance sect and the ancient realm of 10,000 swords. Chenzong only skimmed through them. He was very fast and did not spend much time to finish reading them. He had a basic understanding. In Chenzong's opinion, if a worker wanted to do a good job, he must first sharpen his tools. There was no harm in doing some basic understanding. It was just a waste of time, so it was not a waste. After that, Chenzong began to read the swordsmanship in the library. Sword Dao flourished in the myriad sword ancient domain. When different sword cultivators clashed against each other, sparks of sword Dao would be produced. From there, one sword technique after another would be created. Some of these sword techniques were completely different, while some were similar. Some of these sword techniques were very advanced, while some are more simple. However, no matter what kind of sword technique it was, it must have its own secrets to be able to be created. Although the Sword of Radiance sect was only an Earth-level force, there were more than a dozen swordsmanships in the library. Of course, They were all ordinary swordsmanships. With Chun Zong's current attainments in swordsmanships, he could understand the mysteries of the swordsmanships just by looking at them once. It was a pity that these dozen or so sword techniques were too ordinary, and the mysteries they contained were rather shallow. They could not improve the single-hearted sword technique, but it was better than nothing. They could be used as a foundation, and in the end, it would be useful. After reading more than a dozen swordsmanships, Chun Zong went on to read a bunch of sword tactics to comprehend their mysteries. However, in Chun Zong's opinion, these sword tactics were relatively simple. Sect leader, the most profound sword technique in your sect should be the Sword of Radiance technique. Chun Zong's voice passed through the void and directly entered the ears of the Sword of Radiance sect leader, causing his expression to change involuntarily. In the end, he agreed to let Chun Zong observe the swordsmanships and sword tactics. However, he only allowed Chun Zong to observe the more ordinary swordsmanships and sword tactics, and avoided the true legacy of the Sword of Radiance sect, the Sword of Radiance Codex. The Sword of Radiance Codex had cultivation techniques, swordsmanships, sword tactics, and so on. It was very comprehensive and was the true legacy of the Sword of Radiance sect. Even most of the people in the sect could not see it, let alone practice it. How could he be willing to let an outsider observe it? Sect leader, you must understand the meaning of using peaceful means before resorting to force. Chun Zong's voice rang out again. Although he was calm, there seemed to be a hint of threat in his voice. In the end, the Sword of Radiance sect leader compromised. However, the Sword of Radiance Codex was not recorded in a book. It was recorded on a jade wall in the secret place of the Sword of Radiance sect. Chun Zong stood in front of the green jade wall and observed the sword marks on it. They seemed to be tangled and complicated, but in fact, they were secretly orderly. Under Chun Zong's gaze, the streaks of sword marks seemed to have transformed into streaks of sword light. The sword light was as swift as flowing light as it flew across the sky. Its trajectory was mysterious. It was indeed an extraordinary swordsmanship. Compared to the dozens of swordsmanships in the book collection pavilion, it was many times more powerful. Only the mystery and essence of this sword technique was useful for the single-hearted sword technique. However, it only had a minor effect. Although the Sword of Radiance technique was more profound, Chun Zong still comprehended it very easily. After that, he used his fingers like a sword and lightly drew, leaving a few sword marks on the jade wall. Chun Zong then moved to leave. This scene immediately caused the sect leader's expression to change greatly. He was terrified and extremely angry. He allowed Chun Zong to observe the Sword of Radiance technique, and then destroyed it after observing it. What kind of enmity did Chun Zong have with him? While grieving, the sect master also stared at the sword scars. Suddenly, his expression changed. He felt that the sword scars contained an unfathomable mystery and faintly matched with the sword principle of flowing light. Unconsciously, the sect leader began to comprehend it. Once he comprehended it, he discovered that the mystery was amazing. In the end, he could not help but laugh heartily. He was extremely happy and carefree. "Thank you very much, Senior." The sect leader no longer resented Chun Zong in his heart. Instead, he bowed in the direction that Chun Zong left. It was because the sword marks that Chun Zong casually left behind had actually perfected the Sword of Radiance technique, allowing the mystery of the Sword of Radiance technique to reach a higher level. In this way, their overall strength could be improved. Chun Zong's sword traveled thousands of miles, stepping into each and every Earth-level force, regardless of whether it was a sect or a family, to observe their swordsmanship and sword skills. Among them, there were those who cooperated like the Sword of Radiance sect, but there were also those who did not. They still needed Chun Zong's sword power to suppress them. However, there were also those who were very stubborn. In the face of Chun Zong's sword power, they were not willing to compromise. They wanted to see the sword skills, so Chun Zong killed them all. In this regard, Chun Zong let them go. After all, he was not a demon. Although he did things as he pleased, Chun Zong was not a bloodthirsty person. His heart was not bloodthirsty. If he really did kill a sect just to observe the sword skills, it would go against his heart. Moreover, there were so many sword skills in the world. One or two of them would not make a difference. Moreover, since ancient times, there had been so many sword skills that it was unimaginable. There were bound to be many similar ones. Since they were so unwilling, it was fine. They didn't know what they were missing out on. As long as Chunzong studied his swordsmanship, he would leave behind some of his own insights, allowing that swordsmanship to improve further. This could be considered a fateful encounter. Chunzong did not stop at all. He continued to travel around the 10,000 swords ancient realm. He continued to observe the sword skills of the earth-level forces to strengthen his own swordsmanship foundation. At the same time, he also asked some organizations that specialized in collecting information to pay attention to the movements of the ancient phoenix domain, especially the movements of the ancient phoenix goddess. Time passed. 1 year passed. 2 years passed. 3 years passed. Chunzong had already traveled to all the earth-level forces in the 10,000 swords ancient realm. He observed most of the sword skills, and thus became famous. Many people in the 10,000 swords ancient realm knew that there was a powerful sword cultivator who went around observing sword skills to verify his own swordsmanship. Moreover, after observing, he would leave behind some insights to further improve the sword skills he observed. Those forces that had their swordsmanship observed had also benefited from it, causing those forces that refused to be observed to feel endless regret. Unfortunately, even if they went to invite Chunzong, he would not come again. After 3 years, Chunzong's accumulation of sword skills had reached an astonishing level. His single-hearted sword skill had also improved a little. However, his cultivation base had not changed. Although he had some clues, Chunzong still did not know how to break through. This, however, could not be rushed. Now, Chunzong had started to attack the heaven-level forces. He wanted to observe their sword skills. Heaven-level forces naturally could not be compared to earth-level forces. There were not many heaven-level forces in the 10,000 swords ancient realm. There were less than 20 of them. Each heaven-level force had at least a surpassing realm expert, and even a quasi-saint expert. Not only that, the top heaven-level forces even had pristine saint experts. 1 heaven-level force, 2 heaven-level forces. Chunzong visited them one by one, requesting to observe their sword skills. The 9th heaven-level force was a powerful heaven-level force called the Giant Sword Sect. There was a quasi-saint expert in this force. "My sect does not welcome you." The sect master of the Giant Sword Sect frowned and stared at Chunzong. He was about to expel Chunzong. This was not the first time Chunzong had encountered such a situation. Hence, he did not say anything. He just smiled and said, "I am only here to observe the sword skills. After observing, I will also leave behind some insights. Perhaps I can further improve it to a certain extent. I am not asking for it alone." There were gains and losses. It was like a transaction. There was no advantage. Get lost. My sect's sword skills are unfathomable. There is no need for you to improve it. Before the sect master of the Giant Sword Sect could respond, an overbearing and powerful roar suddenly sounded. It was like rolling thunder that instantly exploded in the sky. It carried with it an extremely terrifying sword power. It was as if the mountains were collapsing and the earth was splitting. The aura was extremely shocking and ferocious. Vaguely, it seemed as if a giant sword was pressing down from the sky, suppressing everything. Chunzong was attacked by such a tyrannical sword pressure. He frowned slightly and faintly showed a touch of displeasure. It was fine if the sect master was unwilling, but he was so irritable. In that case, he would personally try the Giant Sword Sect's sword skills. That was also a method. The moment the thought came to his mind, a sword power rose from Chunzong's body and directly shattered the giant sword shadow. However, Chunzong actually did not explode with his full strength. He controlled it at the level of the quasi-supreme sword realm and did not expose the amazing power of the supreme sword realm. Immediately, the pressure of the giant sword became even more tyrannical. It pressed down like a mountain and overturned the sea, causing the people of the Giant Sword Sect to crawl on the ground and be unable to move. Qinzong's figure flashed and rushed to the sky. He was unwilling to fight in the giant sword sect. Otherwise, the giant sword sect would be damaged or even destroyed. He came only to seek the path, not to destroy the sect. When Qinzong rushed to the sky, a huge sword light also rushed to the sky from the giant sword sect. It repelled the sky and turned into a giant sword that slashed across the sky. Although it was slow, it was like a sword mountain that swept everything in its path. It was overbearing and peerless. The sky faintly cracked and shattered. It was a shocking sight. A terrifying aura spread out between heaven and earth, as if it was going to destroy everything. The power of the giant sword was extremely shocking. Qinzong was locked in place, but his expression did not change at all. He was as calm as a master. Chapter 2993. Above the sky, the sword light was vast and mighty. The swords used by the giant sword sect were at least as wide as a palm, or even as wide as a waist. The width and thickness of such swords were astonishing, and they were also longer than ordinary swords. The weight of the entire sword was also very shocking, easily weighing thousands of kilograms, tens of thousands of kilograms, or even tens of thousands of kilograms. Just by swinging such a heavy sword, the sword power brought about was very frightening, and the sword wind was extremely shocking. Moreover, their inherited swordsmanship was also compatible with such a huge sword, and the power exerted was even more terrifying and astonishing. Often, they could use their strength to suppress others and attack with their momentum, causing the opponent to be directly at a disadvantage and be restrained in all aspects. In the end, they were defeated or even killed. The great sword technique was indeed unique. Coupled with a great sword that was as thick as his waist, every strike seemed slow, but it carried an extremely shocking power and sword aura. It was as if a sword mountain was pushing forward, and it was extremely overbearing. However, Qinzong stood in the sky, with a sword in his hand, and displayed his swordsmanship. Each sword move was very concise and just right, but it seemed simple, but in fact it contained endless mysteries, and there were thousands of changes in it. The endless changes were unpredictable, as if there was the momentum of a landslide, the momentum of a flowing river, the momentum of a strong wind, and alternating between reality and reality to the extreme. Fast and slow, strong and weak were connected without any form, and it could be said to be the extreme of swordsmanship. The giant sword sect's quasi-saint's giant sword technique was very frightening, and the power of each sword move was extremely shocking. Even if it was an ancient mountain in front of him, it would also be chopped into pieces and turned into powder. However, Qinzong did not move at all. With only one sword move, with extremely superb swordsmanship and simple techniques such as pointing, cutting, leading, and collapsing, he resolved the terrifying power of the opponent's giant sword technique. In the midst of resolving, the quasi-saint of the giant sword sect also erupted with more and more terrifying power, allowing Qinzong to see more of the mysteries of the giant sword technique. Gradually, Qinzong understood the mysteries of the giant sword technique. With Qinzong's current attainments in swordsmanship, there were not many people in the world who could be compared with him. Standing in the supreme sword realm was even more advantageous. After some observation and deduction with an extremely profound foundation, the mystery of the giant sword technique gradually emerged. The great sword art was indeed mysterious. Although the moves were simple, it had the effect of refining the body. It made the body of the person who practiced the great sword art stronger and stronger. Only then could one wield a great sword art that weighed thousands or even tens of thousands of jin with only one's physique and make it as light as a feather. Using a powerful force to control a huge sword that weighed over 10,000 kilograms, and then using the giant sword technique, the power of each sword was very terrifying. It could be said to be extremely tyrannical, making it difficult for people to take it head-on. In addition, Qinzong could also feel the astonishing sword momentum contained in the giant sword technique that could destroy everything. Is this the giant sword technique? It's just SOSO. Qinzong said with a chuckle after gradually peering into the mystery. This directly angered the quasi-saint of the giant sword sect. With a roar, the quasi-saint of the giant sword sect roared loudly. At the same time, the great sword in his hand expanded wildly, directly becoming 100 meters long. It traversed the sky, and a monstrous sword intent swept across and suppressed everything. Slash! The 100-meter-long great sword slashed down from the sky. Everything was smashed under this sword and turned into powder. Chunzong couldn't help but look dignified, although such a sword couldn't really threaten him. If he only had the strength of a quasi-saint, then this sword was very terrifying. This was the unique move of the giant sword technique, the giant sword slashing heaven and earth. However, Chunzong's swordsmanship was extremely superb and indescribable. With that swordsmanship, he hit the weak point of this move. After breaking it with 3 swords, the quasi-saint of the giant sword sect looked extremely shocked. However, he broke out again. His whole body suddenly grew half a meter in the air. His whole person seemed to have turned into a small giant, and the aura he emitted became more and more terrifying. Slash! 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 This move was different from the previous slow move. In just an instant, he slashed out 3 times in a row. It was as fast as lightning. In an instant, the 3 swords merged into one and slashed directly at Chunzong. Its power was astonishing, and it was also one of the killing moves of the giant sword sect. However, as the divine light in Chunzong's eyes flowed, he saw through the mystery of this move. He gently waved the heavenly sword in his hand. It seemed to be a point, but also seemed to be a slash. In an instant, he displayed Sword 1 to Sword 4. 4 sword lights of different strengths and weaknesses followed different trajectories and attacked in an instant. Although the swords came out at different times, the 4 sword lights hit the same point at the same time. After a slight pause, the terrifying sword light once again collapsed from the point where it was hit by the sword. In the next breath, it directly turned into fragments that sputtered in all directions. The quasi-saint of the giant sword sect became more and more furious. He kept waving his sword, slashing out extremely terrifying sword lights that shattered the sky. No matter how he attacked, they were all resolved by Chunzong's swordsmanship. His methods have been gradually seen through by Chunzong and then deduced, making it easier to deal with. Let's end it here. Chunzong's voice rang out. It was like a wisp of cool breeze that swept across the sky. Immediately after, he slashed out with his sword. The sword light was as serene and serene as water, stirring up traces of ripples in the sky. It seemed slow, but was actually fast. In an instant, it swept across the sky. It was played down, as fine as a ripple, and did not carry any power. However, when this water-like sword light slashed, the quasi-saint of the giant sword sect waved his giant sword and collided with it with all his strength. His expression suddenly changed greatly. He only felt that within the water-like sword light, although it seemed gentle, it contained an extremely domineering force. It was incomparably terrifying and unstoppable. There was also an endless intent that followed closely behind, layer by layer. He could not block it. With just a face-to-face confrontation, the sword light shattered. His entire person was sent flying backward, spurting blood wildly. At the last moment, the sword light paused and then dissipated into the void, disappearing without a trace. The quasi-saint of the giant sword sect was pale and bewildered. There was even some trepidation in his eyes. He was so close. He was so close to being killed on the spot. In the end, his opponent also stopped. He looked at Chunzong with a very complicated expression. However, he turned around without saying a word and transformed into a sword light to escape. Even so, he was still unwilling to let Chunzong observe his swordsmanship. Chunzong did not say anything, nor did he insist. His figure flashed, and with a step, he was already thousands of meters away. He quickly left. The essence of the giant sword technique had long been grasped by Chunzong. The only thing he lacked was that he had not truly integrated it into the single-hearted sword technique. However, he could still do it in the following period of time. Chunzong went to heaven-grade forces one after another. The battle between Chunzong and the quasi-saint of the giant sword sect was also seen by many people. The result was astonishing, and it made Chunzong's reputation spread far and wide. It was also more convenient for him to continue his journey. Now, news of Chunzong was circulating in many Sword City restaurants in the 10,000 Swords ancient domain. His background and so on were also investigated. Of course, some of the more secretive information was not known. For example, Chunzong was a member of Taishin sect, or Chunzong once received an attack with 80% of the strength of a heavenly phoenix seen outside the ancient Phoenix Mountain, and so on. Even so, Chunzong was still regarded as a top-notch quasi-saint. His swordsmanship was even more astonishing. As Chunzong continued to comprehend, observe, and fight fiercely with experts, the swordsmanship he displayed became more and more astonishing. Some people faintly began to crown him with the title of the world's #1 swordsmanship. This was naturally a joke. After all, who would really dare to say that they were #1 in the world? Those who called Chunzong's swordsmanship this way were those who were relatively inexperienced. However, as Chunzong defeated one sword expert after another, this title seemed to have received greater recognition. Lingxi Mountain. This mountain was not very high. It was only a few thousand feet high, but it was famous far and wide. With poetry, the mountain was not about its height. With immortals, it was famous, whether a mountain was famous or not. The most important thing was not its height, but its background. What kind of background was it? The scenery in the mountain, and even the living creatures living in the mountain. With a phoenix resting in it, even a small valley would be crowned with the beautiful title of Fallen Phoenix Valley. The reason why Lingxi Mountain was famous far and wide was that there was an expert living on the mountain. He was a sword expert. How strong was he? Saint level. The person who lived here was a sword saint. His swordsmanship was superb and exquisite. In terms of swordsmanship alone, he was incomparable to others. Even the sword saints of the 4 holy lands praised him endlessly. It was widely acknowledged that he was outstanding. The Lord of the Myriad Swords Mountain even personally invited this person to be a founding member of the Myriad Swords Mountain. Unfortunately, he was rejected. This person had once challenged the world with his sword. With his superb swordsmanship, he was invincible. He defeated one sword expert after another and became famous all over the world. This person was the Lingxi Sword Saint. This mountain was also renamed because of his arrival. It was now known as Lingxi Mountain. The Lingxi Sword Saint was a lone cultivator. He did not join any holy land, nor did he have any plans to establish a sect. However, the world did not dare to underestimate him. The 4 holy lands also did not neglect him. On Lingxi Mountain, there were 3 people, 2 men and a woman, who were having a heated discussion. No, there were only 2 people who were having heated discussion. They were the young man and woman. Unparalleled Jindy, best swordsmanship in the world? What a joke. No matter how powerful his swordsmanship is, how can it be compared to our Lingxi sword technique? The young man said with an agitated expression. His tone was fast like a storm. He only has some swordsmanship attainments. How dare he claim to be the best in the world and try to suppress our Lingxi sword technique? I can't take this lying down. That's right. Eldest senior brother, this person is too arrogant. He actually dares to claim that his swordsmanship is the best in the world. He clearly doesn't take our Lingxi sword technique seriously. The woman also looked indignant. We should defeat this person so that he knows how powerful we are. Our Lingxi sword technique is the real best in the world. Junior brother, junior sister, don't say that. Our Lingxi sword technique is certainly extraordinary. But to say that it's the best in the world, even Master can't say that. The eldest senior brother, who looked a little sad, said in a gentle voice, "What's more, the best swordsmanship in the world was not spread by Chunzong himself. It's just the nonsense of some inexperienced people. It's not true. Don't take it to heart. The most important thing now is to speed up your cultivation and strive to cultivate the Lingxi sword technique to a higher level and master more sword skills." After he finished speaking, the eldest senior brother no longer paid any attention to them. In his opinion, it was merely a hot-blooded and impulsive thought of young people. It was equivalent to a dispute of personal feelings and was meaningless. If they had the time and energy, they might as well study swordsmanship and strive to improve further. Second senior brother. Even if the eldest senior brother doesn't care, we can't do the same. The woman clenched her fists. She was furious. No matter what, we can't let that person take our Lingxi sword technique as the best in the world. That's right. Let's go down the mountain and find him now. We'll defeat him directly and prove that our Lingxi sword technique is the best in the world. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.